a clue from David that maybe we want to get this show on the road. So why don't we do that? Let's get this show on the road. I will share our links as usual in the chat to get us kicked off started. Voila. We are the Kenneth Smith Seminar, Millennia Microcosm. It's our 164th week. Oh my God. We are in year 3 of the seminar. The seminar is divided into 3 parts, one part on the ancient world and its worldview, one on the medieval world and its worldview, and one on the modern world and its worldview. We are just starting year 4, so we're in the second of 2 years that is about the medieval worldview. And we expect this to be a 6-year seminar. And of course, we met for years before this, talking about other Kenneth Smith things, as David points out. So we've been doing this a little more than 3 years. But this book, we're just entering year 4 here. Chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, and some more are about the medieval section, and we are in chapter 8. And in here we are talking about teleology, heaven and hell. What is the nature of God, and what does God expect of us? How are we to relate to God? And what is the nature of life and the afterlife? And how do they inform our behavior? And all of this is not an attempt to say, how is the world actually? Because that's not what this book is about. All of this is an attempt to say, how did medieval people imagine the world to be? What was their picture of the world? Because we're not in the business of saying what's true and what's false. We're in the business of learning to look through more than one set of lenses. Right now, we can only see through the lenses of modernity. We're trying to learn how to also see through the lenses of the ancient world and also through the medieval world so that we can pit them against each other and we can learn, right? What are the limitations of each perspective, including the one we were born into? So when we talk about divine teleology and heaven and hell, we are not talking about what is actually true, and we're not talking about what do we think. We're trying to talk about how did the medievals think that this worked. And Kenneth Smith is describing the medieval worldview and perspective in contrast to the ancient worldview, which we did in our first 2 years. So we're actually talking 2 worldviews at the same time, trying to pin them against each other. And Kenneth is delaying our return to talk about what do we think and how does the modern world work until after we're fully armed with the ancient and the medieval worldviews, so that we can pit them against our own assumptions. And oh yes, well there are the final sentences of paragraph 9 that Stephen has posted. I was gonna post that because that was where we left off, and in particular that final sentence I thought would be an interesting, juicy place to pick back up where we left off. Um, Kenneth writes, trying to induce people to understand a transvaluation when they hardly comprehend values at all is a thankless task. And as we said last week, Kenneth writes using keywords. He's constantly alluding to other philosophers. And the more you read him, the more you learn to slow down and chew his sentences, look for these references. And in this case, the reference is transvaluation. Who wrote about a transvaluation of values? It's Nietzsche. This is a Nietzsche reference. And this is Nietzsche's frustration with the modern world after spending an entire career specializing in trying to understand the ancient world. As Kenneth says in his recorded class about Nietzsche Beyond Good and Evil, he says to understand Nietzsche, you have to understand what he did for a living. What he did for a living changed the kind of person he was. It had to leverage gifts that he already had that he didn't know were going to be important, and then turn them up to 11. His aratai, became centered on these issues of reading a text not as he would have written it, but trying to understand how the author would have meant it when he wrote it. Trying to learn the subtle distinctions between how would Paul have written in 50 versus how would a growing Orthodox movement within Christianity have wanted to rewrite Paul in the year 150, and smelling the difference, seeing differences in idiom, terminology, assumptions about the world. In other words, everything we're trying to do in this book, Millennium Microcosm, is just riffing off of what Nietzsche did for a living. So his referencing the transvaluation here is relevant. With transvaluation, we're talking about this issue as we move from the ancient worldview to the medieval worldview. The medieval founding fathers, if you will, the early church fathers are and mothers, right? Because originally there were plenty of both. They were overthrowing, they were challenging and refuting and overthrowing the ancient worldview and its value system and replacing it with a new kind of revolutionary, deeply hostile set of values so that you couldn't believe both at the same time. They were incompatible with each other, or Kenneth likes to say incompossible. You couldn't have both. And so what we're talking here is this idea of we were just wrapping up paragraph 9 talking about this issue of what if the purpose of Christianity, what if the purpose of prayer wasn't to get presents from Santa Claus, the way so many people think it is? What if the purpose of prayer is to open yourself to the possibilities ahead of you? To say, I can't control the cards that I'm dealt. I can't say, I wish I were taller. I wish I were richer. I wish I were whatever. It's not going to lead anywhere good. But what I can do is ask God to help me understand my circumstances realistically and to compare that with what I wish were true so that I have a chance for finding some path forward to make things better. Now, whether that's better for me or whether it's better for other people or whether it's both or some other, combination of factors, that's secondary. The primary issue is prayer meant to fill Santa's bag full of presents, or is prayer meant to alter our character, to help us develop our character, to be more capable of handling the challenges that we face? And that's what he's saying. And when he says trying to induce people to understand a transvaluation when they hardly comprehend values at all, this is what he's talking about. He's saying, trying to get people to understand that the purpose of prayer isn't to get goodies, but to become a healthier person who's more up to the challenges that they face. It's really hard to get moderns to think that way. And it was part of the challenge that they were fighting as the medieval epoch was beginning to replace the ancient epoch. It's like this, we don't do these things just for because we've always done them before. We're not talking about tribal ritual cults among the Greeks or the Romans, which is what a lot of their religion had been for, 1,000 years. We're certainly not talking about the modern idea of, pray for the governor to stop taxing you, within an inch of your life, and maybe God will directly intervene and slap the wrist of the governor, and now your taxes will be reasonable. It's like it's none of that stuff. But it can be about thinking about where do we go from here? What's a better path forward? So that's the transition that leads into where we want to kick off today, which is paragraph 10. So I'm going to drop the text from the opening of paragraph 10 in, and let's just take it from here and see what we get. He turns his topic from prayer to immortality. Exemplary of the transfigurations which the organized church worked on Jesus's teachings is the concept of immortality. The Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, full of Jesus's logia or wisdom sayings, has nothing to remark about immortality. The New Testament's accounts of Jesus's speeches and sermons hint only offhandedly at the sufferings of the damned. Or it's just not central to the teachings of Jesus. Well, heaven, hell, what happens afterwards, it's not the point. Or at least it wasn't for Jesus. It might be the point that the church is later going to make it into, over the course of the medieval epoch, as Sharon likes to say, as a growing tool of social control to try to stabilize the politics of the medieval period. But early on, when we're talking about the authentic message, what we see in them is this. It's not focused on join the church and tithe and do all the things you're told, or else you'll burn in hell. And it's not be a good person so that you can be rewarded by going to heaven. None of that is central to Jesus's teachings. That's all, if anything, a massive distortion, or as he says, a transfiguration of Jesus's teachings. Now, this is interesting because the way he's using transvaluation, the sentence before, and transfiguration in this sentence, he's almost suggesting that what's happening in the transition from the ancient world to the medieval world isn't just what we usually think of as one big transvaluation of values, as the old worldview collapses and a new worldview with its own value system replaces it. He's almost arguing instead that there are two transvaluations occurring. There's the transvaluation that Jesus is proposing, where we focus on being better people and taking care of the poor and the sick and the lepers and everybody else. And we put the forms and the rites and the rituals second, and we put the brotherhood of man first. right? That's Jesus's initial transvaluation of values, but that it's followed within a few centuries by a second transvaluation of values that is also part of the move out of the ancient world and into the medieval world, which is the church is going through and editing Jesus's teachings to downplay the issue of, be kind to women, be kind to the poor, be kind to lepers. And it's upplaying, do what we say or you go to hell. So there's a double. This is an unusual. He's pitching, and this is not an entirely illegitimate interpretation. I mean, my wife's going through the church history right now for her degree. This is not an entirely illegitimate interpretation of what happens over the course of these few centuries when Christianity arises from this very small movement of maybe a dozen or so people, to the point where it becomes the religion of the empire. During that time, there is on the one hand the first wave of the revolution in values, you know, from Jesus' teachings, and then there is this second wave, which is to take that religion and make it compatible with an imperial religion, something that could run an empire that becomes about pay your taxes, don't argue with the Roman centurions, don't argue with your priests, be good. Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Well, the first question is that are you sure Christmas is not about presents? I mean, I really do need to know that. I mean, you're really killing me on that one. I mean, but aside from that, um, this idea of the um, the use of heaven and hell, one part of it could be a use of fear and control. But there's a second point here that it could also be a use of people's desires as well, in the sense that, people desire to see whoever it is that they've lost again, in a way, so that it entices them to really want something. And when you look at it from that perspective, it is a distortion in the sense that the way to actually desire what is good is to circumscribe your desires, is not to just do whatever it is that you feel, that fits the narrative that you want about reality. And I understand that desire to, be reunited. And I think we all do to some degree. But I look at this perversion is on kind of in a couple of different ways. It's a way of kind of capitalizing on two different things, people's fear, but also what they long for. And that's where the perversion really kind of comes in, and it's twofold. It's not necessarily just from that one perspective. And I, wanted to maybe get your thoughts on that in particular, because I think that that's a real, I mean, it's part of the perversion in the sense that how do you desire what is good if you're really just doing something maybe for the reason of being rewarded, not seeing that the reward is the act. So that's the perversion, like the distortion of not seeing, like, well, I'm going to do something good because it's good. That's the reason you do it. I'm going to do something good because I want to, see someone else. And again, I don't necessarily want to judge anybody's motivations, nor their beliefs. So it's like I definitely I don't want to go there. I'm not trying to do that by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that that's one of the perversion in the values that actually that you're referring to.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There is a Greek strand of wisdom that goes strongly with Jesus's teachings on this, and Diogenes, the proper conduct of life requires right reason or a leash. You either have to be able to understand the world and your appetites in such a way that it can lead you to do the right thing, or someone needs to put a leash on you. Either you can control yourself or somebody else has to control you. And this is related to Heraclitus's. It would not be better for men if they got what they wanted. And when he's criticizing the people of Ephesus, the majority of people for having no wisdom at all, he says they glut themselves like cattle. He says people let their appetites rule them to such an extent that they cease to be individuals and become walking, talking appetites. And if you let these people do what they want, it's not going to be what's the healthiest for them or for their neighbors or for their species or for the planet because they're reacting to their desires so uncritically. They're not exercising any quality control. When they feel the desire, they're not stepping back and going, now let me inspect that desire and see if this is healthy or not. They're just saying, oh, I want it because I want it. Wanting it is enough. That's all I should. It doesn't matter why I want it. Nobody should ask me that question. I should just be able to have it. And Jesus is saying you should question that. There's more to life than goodies. And some of the goodies you want will make you sick and make other people sick. You gotta have a grown-up mind in relationship to your appetites. You gotta think about what does our community need? What do you need? And it might not be the thing that you immediately desire. This issue of not being ruled. In order to be a person, to be able to function at a political level, to be able to govern, requires that you long since have put a leash on your appetites. You can have them. You should know what your appetites are telling you. And sometimes you should do what your appetites are suggesting because sometimes they're healthy. But when they're not healthy, you should be able to say, "Yeah, I know you want another slice of chocolate cake, but I think one was enough there, buddy. We'll have another one tomorrow after I have a chance to eat a salad or something." It's like I'm not just going to eat slice after slice after slice because my tongue is titillated by sugar. I can have a mature relationship to my appetite.
You don't have to
Uh,
kill everything. You
say
killed
that again.
presents, now you're killing chocolate. I mean,
I know I'm just a
oh
terrible
my
person.
God, it's
I'm just, my
I,
God.
it,
And this is
yeah,
what Aristotle says when he says everything in moderation. He's quoting Mede Nagan. He's quoting the Oracle at Delphi. What is the meaning of Mede Nagan? And it is, yeah, you can have a slice of chocolate cake, but you shouldn't have all the slices of chocolate cake, and sometimes you should have something else. You got to figure out where is the healthy path ahead of us. And of course, what's hard for a modern to see in these exhortations is the assumption that underlies it that's so important to the Greeks, which is that we need to intervene like this because we're Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens lack sophrosyne. If we were if I were an acorn, it would be good for me to pursue what I want because I would want the things that an acorn needs to want in order to grow up to be a healthy oak tree. And because in the course of growing up to be a healthy oak tree, I'm going to improve the entire world around me. Oak trees make everything better. I mean, the huge number of butterflies and moth species that they host, and therefore the huge number of birds that an oak tree hosts, and all those acorns feeding all the animals in the woods are feeding people. It's enormous, right? Just the act of pursuing your self-interest as an acorn
mm,
leads to a better world. But in Homo sapiens, we lack sophrosyne. And so our desires are as likely to be wrong as right, if not more. And so we have to intervene with these other faculties and try to figure out, was this a good desire or a bad desire? This Greek idea that Aristotle is on about with med and agon and nothing to excess and the golden mean. All of this is closely related to what Jesus is talking about. It's like, yeah, okay, well, maybe you should eat that food, or maybe you should share some of it with your neighbor who's starving to death. Maybe I've eaten fine for the last 2 months. If I eat half as much today, it's not going to hurt me none. But if I don't give a little bit to my neighbor, he may be dead tomorrow. So, how do you think about the health of the community and the health of the self at the same time and balance them against each other to create where is the optimal path forward? Maybe the optimal path is that I eat the whole meal, but maybe it's not. And I'm not going to know unless I think about it.
right. I there's this other aspect of it, if you don't mind, if I can
Please,
go.
please.
Um, and look, it's like I understand these desires. Is that one is this desire is not necessarily something that is harmful, right? That's what's so unfortunate about it is that it's not well, it's a reasonable desire in the sense that what you want. However, even that becomes a perversion, primarily because then you focus on what is lacking rather than what was given. So, in other words, if you're focusing on the fact that someone's not there and what you're going to get to, so there's that other perversion that exists within that and that focus is can really be uh I don't know distort one's perception of reality, because then it's all about what you're going to get and not what you have, and then there's a lack of a gratitude within that process. And so I think that that's one of the values that have been then kind of distorted. And why is that distorted? Because obviously there are institutional reasons as to why that gets distorted. Right. So it's just interesting to see how the perversion of values can be also not only one of do what I say out of fear, but it can be perverted, and there's a little bit of there is reasonableness in the sense that somebody, it's not a bad thing to want to spend time with someone that that you may never see again, or
Exactly.
so things like that. It's just that the perversion of values becomes really distorted when we create a narrative that only fits the the benefit of whatever it is that's creating the narrative. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be that of just religious purposes. It can be any institution at all.
That's right.
And so, I mean, it can be, believe me, I've seen things in corporations and government and everything that where
Yeah.
it's totally distorted
Yeah.
values. And so it's something to be like kind of cognizant of.
Exactly. And this is why I always bring up alcoholism as my little personal bit of character flaw that I inherited from my family is that if I didn't know that, my life would be a disaster. But I do know it, so I can do something about it. So Aristotle's whole line is, yeah, we lack sophrosune, but that doesn't mean let's throw in the towel. That means if we know that we lack sophrosune, we can do something about it. We can
Right.
try to be smarter about our desires. And if we're smarter about our desires, we might be able to compensate for the problem and have a good, healthy life. But if we just stick our head in the sand and pretend it's not happening, then we're guaranteed to have a terrible outcome because you just can't trust. It's like, when you're in the desert and it's hot and you're feeling sunburned and you're really thirsty, that desire is probably right on the money. It's not like it is neither the case that our desires are always reliable and we should follow them, nor is it the case that they're always unreliable and we
Right.
should flout them.
So,
It's complicated, right? It's like you're saying, it's like you gotta figure it out case by case, situation by situation. And you've got to learn to prioritize your values. Because I can go weeks without eating, but I can only go days without water, and I can only go minutes without air. It's like, if I'm suffering from all three, I'd better focus on the air right now, right? I need to, and
right,
that's where
right.
my smarts
Yeah,
need to come
exactly.
in. Be able to prioritize.
That's right.
So yeah, yeah. So these are the point that Jesus and Aristotle are making, and how often do you get to say that? The point that Jesus and Aristotle are making. The point that they're making is that to solve these problems requires bringing the adult judgment into something that we feel like it ought to be automatically. It ought to be so easy that it's just automatic. I want, therefore I should get. And instead, it turns out, no, you got to bring all your powers to bear to figure out what is to be done. It's not that easy. Uh, and that's a hell of a place to need to be a grown up because then how are you supposed to make it through childhood and adolescence to get to be a grown up, to have enough judgment to evaluate whether or not you should do what you want? It's kind of an unfair, it's this is that thing. We talk about being dealt a bad hand. Homo sapiens has been dealt a bad hand. Wouldn't it be nice if every time you wanted something, that was a great choice? I mean, what if you just literally never wanted to do the things that would hurt you or society or the ecosystem? That would be fantastic. That's what I
It,
think.
it also, and I'm definitely done after this, is that it distorts the one thing is that the mistake that you could make, right? So you make a mistake and you think, well, I'll just get what I want later. Not, oh, I shouldn't do that ever again.
Yeah.
So the feedback mechanism is kind of perverted too. It's like, well, you know what, I should have done X, Y, and Z, but I'll see that person later on.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, no, that's really hard feedback. Maybe you ought not do it ever again. And so that's another aspect of it. So that creates a lack of introspection within that in that regard, and that's also a distortion of what you even value.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah,
sorry.
I mean, it's great feedback. This is this is a problem for us is partly, explicated by stories from history or from fiction. And I'm just going to give two simple examples before I call on Donald. Sorry, Donald, I'm keeping you waiting here. And one of them is Torquemada in the Inquisition. He's torturing people to death. Why is he torturing people to death? Well, we say it's because he's crazy and hateful, but that's not the. You can read Torquemada's letters. That is not his motivation. We want it to be that because that would be easy. We could say, let's put the villain. He gets the villain hat, right? Because he did terrible things. He must be a bad guy. But no, it was out of love, right? He tortured people to death out of love because his conception of love had been changed by this second transvaluation of values that Kenneth is alluding to in these opening three sentences. And he's like, well, yeah, I could feed you and put a blanket around you so you're warm, but that's just your body. And the church teaches me the body doesn't matter. It's only the soul that matters. And, a few hours or days of torture are nothing compared to an eternity of torture in hell. So I'm justified in pulling out your teeth and your fingernails and anything else I have to if there's a chance that I can save your immortal soul, because infinity is a bigger number than, 3 or 4 or however many days it is. And so it's out of love that I torture you. I'm trying to help you, man. And it shows the power, first of all, that a transvaluation of values can have. And second of all, again, it shows how the Greeks are on the money when they say not having sophrosune is an enormous deficit. It is a weakness of spectacular proportions. You will see cheetahs fight and kill each other, but you will never see one cheetah hold another down and pull all its claws out one by one because it's trying to change its mind. Only a human being would do that. It is a level of confusion about reality and right and wrong that evolution doesn't let the animals have that. They would have died out already, right? They're those sorts of completely counterproductive non-survival things. They are whittled away through survival of the fittest, and you're left with all these animals whose instincts point them more or less in the right direction. But unfortunately, we don't have that pointer, and it becomes so. The other example is there's a horror film, again, trying to play with this question of how do you illustrate the possibility that with Homo sapiens, even love can turn into an object of fear. And it's a black and white film from France from the 1950s or 60s, I forget. And it's called Eyes Without a Face, Les Yeux Sans Visage, by Georges Franju, I think is the director. And it is, it's not about gore. It's not that kind of a horror film. It's a horror film, and it takes a long time in watching the film to work out what it's about. And I'm going to spoil it because I know most people would never see it anyway. It's obscure, but it's a classic among horror aficionados. And what it is this: we see a woman who's wearing a mask, a young woman wearing a mask, and she's a figure, a recurring figure, and what she's doing there isn't all clear to us. But there's also a doctor and his assistants, and they're out kidnapping young women knocking them out, bringing them back to he's a surgeon, to bring him back to his laboratory. And then he cuts off their face and tries to transplant them onto his daughters over and over and over because he was drunk when he drove the car that caused the accident that ruined his daughter's face. And he saved her life, but not her face. And he loves her so much. He wants to undo the damage. And the only way he can think to do that, remember, this is the 50s. Transplants are like barely a thing. And he's that good. He has these incredible gifts, and armed with love, he wants to fix the problem that he's caused. Now, the fact that motivated by love, he's killing all these women to try to find one, whose face won't be rejected by his daughter's body. It's horrible, right? It's horrible. It's not looking at blood and guts that's horrible. It's that love, even love, could be so perverted in a human being that they would do something like that. And this is still doesn't even come close to Torquemada's sin, right? But it makes it tangible in a way to realize if you know Homo sapiens has this problem, then you can take it seriously and do something about it and figure out how to be a good person. But if you assume that everything that you want is good, well, then what's to stop you from being Torquemada or this terrible surgeon? Nothing, right? They too believed in what they thought they wanted. If I want it, it must be right. And that's where it leads. Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
It was something. Then Joe started talking.
Sorry.
No, not really. I have a few notes. Anyway, Aristotle, moderation in all things, or whatever. That might lie between the choices in a fairly centered society that was largely sane. But I'm not sure that the moderate path is between the choices anymore. That you have to have you have to look, what's the whole scope of choices? Find out where the moderate path that Aristotle was talking about might lie. Because you may be in a society where everything's skewed to one end or another, and picking the moderate path won't help. I mean, a sort of geometric mean or arithmetic mean or something is not gonna get you anything. And then the other is this paragraph 10. It's makes me rethink Nietzsche's that Christianity is a slave religion based on a slave morality. And he finds, seemingly I think it's in the genealogy of morals or something, it doesn't seem very redeeming. And yet, maybe Nietzsche's talking about a more modern version of Christianity that he was not aware of this period, or Kenneth has really resurrected an initial transformation that finds, what would I want to say? Find something of value in early Christianity that Nietzsche may have missed. Or I just go back and think, maybe I misunderstood Nietzsche's critique of Christianity, that Nietzsche didn't miss anything, and I'm the one that missed it. Because it would seem here that the slave morality and the slave religion of early Christianity has a lot to contribute to the discussion of morality, and is not simply a sort of overthrowing of the ancient master morality with its master religion, Anyway, people can find what they want in these things, but I think this is a pretty short paragraph that's pretty significant. If you go back and makes you reread, if it makes you reread Nietzsche, it's done a lot.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, with Nietzsche, it's always tricky because on the one hand, he changes his mind over time. I mean, in his earliest writings, he thinks to be Apollonian is the best possible thing, and Dionysian must be the terrible thing. Yeah, he starts out buying our conception that to be rational and in control is good, and to be irrational and out of control is bad. And it's only over the course of his writings that he gradually talks his way out of that position and goes, "Wow, I totally had this backwards. The modern world is suffering from an excess of control and could stand to be a little more in touch with its feelings and expressions of reality." He starts to become a vitalist instead of a rationalist. So there's some of that going on with the way he critiques Christianity. But also he tries to do the same thing in some ways that Kierkegaard does, which is at least late Kierkegaard, which is he strongly distinguishes between Jesus and Christianity. He's like he has a lot of unflattering things to say about Christianity, but he has very few unflattering things to say about Jesus. And there's a number of places where he has flattering things to say about Jesus. He compares Jesus and Prometheus. He talks about different figures and what their virtues and vices are. And Jesus comes off pretty well, which is I think something that later Christians who feel attacked by Nietzsche don't often want to acknowledge, that he liked his dad's form of Christianity, which is sort of still got that rabbinical quality. It's the search for wisdom and how do we be good people. He was interested in that, but he didn't like his mother's form of Christianity. The whole, if you're happy, you're probably doing something wrong. You should suffer, and that way we know you're virtuous. That was there is, if we want to overly psychologize, which is something Kenneth doesn't care for, we could say, well, it's because of his mother and his father that he likes Jesus but doesn't care for modern Christianity. But I think too, with slave religion, we're looking at that question of, which part is it? The revolutionary slaves who want to overthrow the old system and make a better world, or is it the house slave that doesn't care what happens to the other slaves as long as it's comfortable and pleases the master and gets off without a beating? Which is the slave that he's talking about? It's not always clear in Nietzsche. He's sometimes in a hurry and sometimes he's angry. You sort of have to dig a bit to figure out what he's talking about.
What you said about distinguishing Jesus from Christianity is Walter Kaufmann, the big translator of Nietzsche in Critique of Religion and Philosophy, finds, he talks there about three people: Socrates, Jesus, Buddha, and finds all kinds of, I would say, admirable qualities, not in the movements, but and gives you a real appreciation for, don't write anything down, Rick. It'll only be used against you later, but
Yes.
but it's somewhat the same position that you're attributing to Nietzsche that Kaufman takes, and it's not. Why wouldn't he? Kaufman, if anybody's influenced by Nietzsche, it'd be Kaufman. I mean, he's the 20th century rediscoverer of properly translated Nietzsche. So,
Yeah. I'm still learning my Nietzsche. I still have a lot to read and a lot to chew over and think about. I'm by no means a Nietzsche expert. And he's tricky to be an expert about anyway, because he doesn't just say, here's my system. He's arguing with himself from one book to the next. Like, who wrote that previous book? That guy was an idiot. It's like, wasn't that you, buddy? Like, shut up! Don't bother me with the details. I'm on a journey here, and I'm looking forward. I'm trying to get places. I don't have time to give you an exhaustive description of all the things I did wrong in the past. It also doesn't help that, his sister published his unpublished notebooks full of his half-finished thoughts. The will to power is a whole bunch of. I mean, God, if somebody was to go through my email system and every email that I decided not to send, they haul them all out and say, this is what Rick really believes. I'm like, oh, Rick is often conflicted. There's some things he doesn't send because he changes his mind after he wrote it.
Well, when we did the thing with Kenneth on Kant, he went through this. How many times he's changed what he thinks about the text? I mean, the text that he's reading and commenting on, and the text in which that contains his comments. That it's continual reinterpretation, and that probably, as you say, represents a great deal about what Kenneth is trying to teach.
Yes.
And to be existential is you're constantly revisiting, reevaluating the arguments and whatever to decide how to go forward.
Yeah. What do we see today that I couldn't see 20 years ago in this text? What the hell am I going to see 20 years from now that I have no idea today? It's
Oh, that is so true. That's why I don't know, most, like in Plato in the Republic, the guardians and the rulers, they're about 50 before they're ever even considered. They get
need some life experience under your belt.
life, yeah, what we would consider excessive life experience that but it's that way. Things do change all through your life, hopefully for the better. You come to appreciate things you missed the first time enough.
That's great, Donald. Thank you. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I stuck that reference in there. I'm a bit mysterious about the Johnny Cash song, Ring of Fire. Although it was in the Wagnerian opera when Siegfried has to get through a ring of fire to reach Brunhilde. So maybe that was the inspiration. You know that story, don't you? That Brunhilde was cast into the world of humans, but Odin, as a sort of reprieve, she was put inside a ring of fire, so only a hero could make it to her. But I was being a bit smart on Facebook, and there were people there talking about creation ex nihilo. And I put down the line, sort of like, you guys are such amateurs about theology. And boy, one guy, he just flipped. He considered himself a bit of a genius. Now, if somebody come up to me and said, well, you're just an amateur, it'd be like water off a duck's back.
You're like, tell me something I don't know, man. We're all amateurs here.
But anyway, I have come across this thing that this modern concept of nothing is very much an abstraction, which wasn't so much there in the pre-axial age, gradually developed in the period afterwards. And, there's things like everlasting fire. Well, they didn't mean infinity. They just mean a long time. and yeah, I don't know whether it was here or somewhere else, but the Greek philosophers or in the Greek times, they didn't really like the concept of nothing. Because in our abstract theory, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we go, oh, 0. Oh, 0. So nothing is something. How does that work? It works in mathematics. It makes it easier. And also, you know, when there was a certain idea of, you know, God is so wonderful and so great and all powerful that he creates stuff out of nothing. And that was like, I think St. Augustine and a few of the early church fathers were building up this absolute God. But even there, when you look carefully at the translation, they might have been actually saying God creates out of the unseen, rather than our concept of nothing. And it was in the lectures that Schelling was giving, the ones that Kierkegaard went to, that Schelling was turning around on Hegel, and he was warning that Hegel was full way too much of this concept of nothing, this absolute nothing, infinity, absolute idea and all this. And he's saying that these concepts is a dangerous side. They're full of a negative. You know, again, you know, ancient times people were concrete thinkers. They were thinking about something. Now it's sort of like you'd get one of these ancient fellas and bring them to the modern era in a time machine, and they come back and they say, well, what were they doing in this modern era? And he said, they spend a lot of time thinking and talking about nothing. Anyway, that's my bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. It's one of my critiques of abstract logic and mathematics in the 20th century is there's really an obsession with infinity. And that's a problem because in the real world, we almost never deal with infinity. We have a realm that we need to deal with, which is numbers too big to be practical, but that exist anyway. Like the distance between us and Alpha Centauri. You know, it's like, yeah, I can put a number on that and I can measure it, but in my lifetime, I'm never going to get there. It's too big a number. I couldn't even count that. I'd die before I finished counting the number of seconds it would take to travel from here to Alpha Centauri. So there is this realm that is neglected I think you're right, the ancients were interested in that realm and not interested in the kinds of infinities we're obsessed with. They were interested in big numbers but not impossible numbers. I was told how when they built Greek temples, the pillars that are holding upright, you know, the upper construction were never parallel. They were always turned in a little bit to make a triangle. If you projected the path of the pillars far above the temple, they would meet and you'd end up with a triangle. So they didn't like this is like forever going on forever. You want an infinity? What good is this? This is crazy talk. And I think about how few had any representation for zero. So like if you want to do math with real numbers. I mean, you know, numbers that are meaningful, that exist in nature, not nothing. Nothing is a problem. And anybody who doesn't think nothing is a problem should look at what happens when you divide a number by zero. It is every bit as problematic as if you try to multiply by infinity. It is a place where the math breaks down. And the official rule from mathematics is don't do that. It's like you can divide by any other number, but not this one. Just this is where it breaks. Don't do it. So you know, nothing which we take for granted and use all the time in our calculations is a bigger problem than we're willing to acknowledge. And other epochs have seen it as such, just like they saw infinity as such. I think you're making really important points.
Well, the absolutism of thought is, for example, seen in our modern politics, which seems to be obsessed with everything that is wrong
Yes.
and never talks about anything which is right. And this is Marx. Marx's point of view, there's, you know, year zero, you know, Pol Pot. If we completely wipe away the corrupt society and, you know, shoot all the kulaks and the bourgeoisie, what will be left behind will be pure.
This is very much the thinking that has gone on in Europe ever since the medieval epoch. Because what was the premise of the medieval epoch? If we exterminate all other religions, we will be left with the one true religion, and then we will all be incorruptible. We will serve God, who will keep us on the straight and narrow and keep us from being corrupt. And ever since, we've been using some variation on that same recipe of purification for all of our projects. You know, the religious wars that happen with the breakdown of the medieval epoch are worse than anything that happened during the Middle Ages. You know, genocide, world wars, ecocide, all of this stuff is just a continuation of purify through extermination. I mean, the Holocaust is just a continuation of the medieval program. So it's not surprising that we see it in Marx or in Pol Pot or elsewhere. It is the reflex of moderns to reach for kill all the bacteria, kill all the viruses, sterilize, purify, and that will lead us to health. And we think in doing that that we're thinking in medical terms, but we're actually thinking in medieval genocidal terms and not realizing it.
There was a Gnostic element in Plato, you know, the European Christianity, very much, there was supposed to be a lot of Plato in it. And Plato seemed to be saying, yeah, well, there's the perfection's only up there. You know, if you see, I know you like chasing girls on earth, but they're always going to have a fault. The perfect woman is up there in the world of perfect form. So you're wasting your time down here, dudes. You got to, you know, get away from the shadows and find out where the light is. Although I think Plato had a warning. They had a thing that they were to never call the world of shadows evil, which the Gnostics did.
Right.
He had that proviso that the world of shadows was still a product of the good forces. It had a purpose. Whereas you get the, you know, these Gnostics who would say, this is all the creation of an evil God.
Right.
And our thing is to get out of it.
They just want to simplify into either or, right? One good choice and everything else is bad. Yeah. Yeah, Plato's got more nuance to him than the Gnostics in this regard. Anyway, interesting stuff, Stephen. Thank you. And thanks for the June Carter reference. I did not know that backstory. It's a song I grew up with, and now I'm going to have to chase down and see if I can follow those references. Phineas, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
That was helping me visualize the nothing thing, because I was thinking about that last week and I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was maybe because of this group, I'm not sure. Because I was thinking like, okay, if you have 4 apples and you take away 4 apples, you have 0 apples. Like it's kind of, I'm like, I don't understand how nothing couldn't exist. But then right now, based on what you were saying, it just sparked that if you have, the only way you can have actually nothing is if the apples were completely disconnected from everything else. But actually those apples are directly connected to the person, let's say. So if the person has 0 apples, they're still the person that has the relevance of those 0 apples. So the environment all around the apple still exists. So it's only nothing. So there's not a true, there's not a true nothing, because everything else, which is in that area, still exists. Like, for example, if someone has $0, they have nothing, let's say, but they still have the richness of their life and the environment and the oxygen. So no matter what, they're way up. Even if they die, if you're thinking at a soul level, their soul is still at a way high level. It's still flying through the air or whatever. So the concept of nothing is actually very far removed from reality that we live in, is what I'm thinking.
Yes. Yes. It's what's really interesting about reading Christopher Alexander's 4-volume series, The Nature of Order. The first volume in the series is called The Phenomenon of Life, and the second volume is called The Process of Creating Life. And he talks in there about the way that you look at an apparently empty piece of paper and your mind is already doing math problems with it. It's like there's invisible dotted lines corresponding to the corners, the edges, the center, diagonals from one corner to the next, and all of that. And your brain unconsciously sees that field of possibilities. You could fold it here, you could draw a line there. And if someone just says, start drawing on this thing in a way that shows the geometry of the page, many people will draw similar lines, emphasizing corners and centers and edges and connections. And the same thing he says, you take that apparently blank piece of paper and you take a pen and you put a little dot off center. And all of a sudden, your brain starts again drawing dotted lines unconsciously, making new areas on the thing. And so, even though there's nothing there, your brain is projecting possibilities. And those possibilities aren't just fictions, they're not just imaginary. They literally are sort of implied by the space, even if they're not currently being filled.
Yes, that's very similar to what I'm saying. Yeah, a better
Yeah.
way of looking at it too would be like if you had an empty basket of apples, you
Yeah.
have an empty basket. Like it's sort of, and then that begs the question: if there's a blank sheet of paper but no one there to see it, is it actually nothing?
Right. Right. And if you have a blank basket of apples, it may not have an apple in it now, but your brain is thinking about apples. I mean, I had apples yesterday, and you might be going to go to the apple orchard next week and put some more apples in it. So in your mind, that zero of an empty apple basket is totally different from the zero of a table that doesn't happen to have anything on it. Because the table that doesn't have anything on it doesn't necessarily imply apples. But every time you look at that apple basket, you see the apples that could be in it, and it can change your behavior so that you put apples in it. There's this level in which, I guess one way to think about this is the way that the medievals really struggled to understand the relationship between an acorn and an oak tree. How does the acorn know to become an oak tree? Is there like a tiny oak tree inside the acorn? How does it, where does the picture of the oak tree it grows into live? How does it know? And that problem is exactly the problem of zero. Is there really not any oak tree at all in the acorn? Or is there this, from the Greek perspective, this whole potential series of unfoldings of orders from the acorn that lead that can, and if conditions are right, will lead to the oak tree? It's a different kind of zero than if I put a pebble there and say, now is there an oak tree here or not? And the answer on the pebble is, well, no. But the answer on the acorn is not exactly, but sort of. There's potential. There's oak potential here. It's a different kind of
Yeah,
zero,
that's interesting because then it's like the question of do acorns dream of of being an oak tree?
right?
And then and then it's like, okay, for a person, like do people dream of being a certain kind of person? And it's like, not exactly. It's like I don't dream of being this body that I am right. That kind of happens naturally, but I did dream about like running or like
Right.
thinking, or so I guess an acorn's probably like, where's the soil? Where's the light? And then the oak tree is like an extension of those dreams.
Yes.
Like what
Yes.
comes out of that?
Yes. And that's sophrosune in a nutshell, according to the Greeks, right? Is that the things that the oak will do left to its own devices will lead to the oak tree, even if there's no oak tree apparently visible. It's nevertheless present in some kind of meaningful way. I mean, it's more the presence or absence of an oak tree is a far more interesting question when we're talking about an acorn than if we're talking about me. I'm never going to grow into an oak tree, right? That's just not going to happen. But that acorn might. And so the quality of nothing is different between the two of us.
Yeah, then that begs I'll stop after this. But that begs the question of like, do we have Sofrasune given that we became a fully formed human? Like that I am a proportionate human. Does that mean that I did have some sort of Sofrasune?
Well, and this is where Aristotle scratches his head a lot and says it's complicated. It's like we've got part of it. We've got part of it. The more we get out of our head and into our body, the more we deal at a level where the body is trying to maintain its own health. When does it dump insulin? When does it dump glucagon? When does it raise your blood pressure? When does it lower your blood pressure? When does it raise your blood fats? When does it lower your blood fats? It's trying to do something healthy. But the farther I get away from the wisdom of the body and into my theories about my body, the more trouble I get into. It's like, oh, well, this product that I bought, yeah, I believe the commercial, so I'm going to do this thing. And my body's like, please, God, no. It's like my brain lacks self-resune that my body has.
Yeah, that's fair.
So it's funny. All of this stuff is interesting and complicated. So all right, this is a good discussion, and this has really taken us, to kind of this issue of transvaluations of values, and looking at the kind of successive waves that are happening to move us out of the ancient world. So let's dive deeper into paragraph 10. Kenneth continues, overwhelmingly, immortality in Jesus' own ministry. Oh, Ari dropped off. Let me get him back on here. Um, Overwhelmingly, immortality in Jesus' own ministry is meant to appeal to the pathos of workers and small merchants who sense their own lives expiring like wheat and grass, and all for the sake of what? It is incongruous and inconceivable to them that countless generations labored to sustain life and give birth only to have their survivors languish in futile imperial slavery. And so this again is alluding to that issue. Why did the medieval epoch arise? Because the late Roman Empire was so corrupt. Nobody was getting their needs met. All the promises of the ancient world were being betrayed by the actual form that the late Roman Empire was taking. And it's just it hurts your heart to put together all of your hopes for your children and then to say, well, the only thing open to them is to be ground down in, hideous forms of poverty. Like, there has to be something better than this. Why do I bring these people into the world if it's for this? He says, Jesus asserts for these hopeless multitudes the simple, unspeakable value of being alive, the richness and meaning that life could have in a world where it was not being bled white for the sake of someone else's material gain. And so here, Kenneth is again alluding to the same thing we were talking about. There are the actual material conditions of our life, but then there is the potential of what it could be under other circumstances, and what we call cognitive dissonance or creative tension, pulling between the bad present and the potentially far more fulfilling subjunctive case, the what if. Why does it have to be like this? I can look around and see how arbitrary it is that it is this way. This isn't the forces of history conspiring to offer us no other choice. It's just stupid that things continue the way that they are. And it would take so little to make things so much better that how can you resist? It's like a siren call. We may not have soprasune, but we have enthusiasm. And that enthusiasm sometimes is motivated by, batshit crazy things, but sometimes it's motivated by real driving needs. And when it is, it creates a song within us, a call within us to make us long to change our circumstances. This is one of our sometimes curses, sometimes gifts that we're born with. That when it's channeled correctly can lead to good things. And this is what he's talking about. This transvaluation of values is being driven by people saying, I'm not willing to tolerate this anymore. I need to make things better than this for my children and my grandchildren and my great grandchildren, for my neighbors. It can't be like this anymore. I got to do whatever it takes. And if that means I have to change my value system and think differently about what's important, well, then so be it. Then I have to do that. This is kind of where we're standing. And so immortality from Jesus's perspective within the things that he says, largely, as Kenneth says, have this feeling of heaven on earth as a real potential, just like an oak tree is a real potential for an acorn. And he's saying, you think that you're a dead rock and that you have no hope and that there's nothing more, that this is the best things can be. But I'm here to remind you of that spark of life inside your character that wants to express itself. Because character is always a dynamic thing. It always wants to unfold the new order that is within it, the potential. It doesn't want to be suffocated and die. It wants to get out. And Jesus is saying, yes, that desire for something better, you shouldn't snuff it out. You should remind yourself that just like the acorn can grow into an oak, we could make the world better than the way it is now. We don't have to spend our lives, like fodder, for stupid, violent greedheads. It could be better than this. And so this was the original message, right? This is the original push. So let's continue, right? Paragraph 10. Let's go on to the end of paragraph 10. As Jesus teaches them anew the dead language of joy and gratitude for the beauty that life could have. Oh, I love that sentence so much. Teaches anew the dead language of joy and gratitude. So there, you don't have to accept your life being so constrained that it's as though you already died. You have more agency than that. And you should have more hope than that. Because being joyful in living, being grateful for living, having the kind of life that 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 makes the cheetah delighted to run, that makes the gazelle go, I see you, cheetah, but I'm going to outrun you today. Not today, Mr. Cheetah. My life is worth fighting for. That people should have that alive in them. That yearning to express our capacity for something better than the present moment. The idea that that's a language of the heart and it deserves to be resurrected, which is what he's alluding to here, right? That our hearts need to be resurrected to make us care again and hope again and strive again, because it's only through those things that we're going to make a better world, and that's the purpose of his ministry. See, that's some interesting stuff there. This is not typical theology. He says, the dead language of joy and gratitude for the beauty that life could have, for the freedom to grow in spirit with others. That to have a character, especially the character of a living organism, is to have a need to grow and transform. And that any status quo that, to protect its own wealth and power, tries to insist that nobody grow and nobody change and everybody hold still so that they can prop up the artificial, fragile wealth of the status quo, that system is the enemy of life. We need to grow in spirit, both individually and with others. That's what character is. It is that unfolding of order, that fountain of order that wants to express itself, that needs to express itself. It has to. That's where the change in our life, the course of our life, comes from. Nobody, says the Greeks, just is what they are. They're also the fruit of their past selves and the seed of their future selves. We are on a journey, and we can't stop forever at one spot just because it's convenient for someone else. We have to keep our journey going. That oak is going to keep trying to grow from sapling all the way up. It's not going to say, you wanted a 6-foot tall tree. I'm an oak. I'm 6 feet tall now. I'll just stay here to please you. The oak's like, I'm sorry, buddy. I'm an oak. I got to keep growing. I have centuries to go. I want to be 75 feet tall, 100 feet tall. I want to spread out my canopy across these 8 houses. That's my entelechy. That's where my teleology of my character is yearning to go that way. And you can whip me all you want. I don't want to stay here. I need to keep going. It's what evolution has programmed me to do. And so, like we were talking about with Joe earlier, with people, these issues of sophrosune and growth and development are far more complicated and messy, because some of our desires are healthy ones and some of them are sick ones, and we have a hard time telling them apart. But even when it's a sick desire, that desire is trying to get a change to happen in us. It is a leftover remnant of something healthy, and it too wants to grow and transform and become more fully itself. Nothing in us just is. We're always on the damn journey. Heraclitus, right? Kenneth continues, coupled with the pain of their meaningless lives is the horror of a meaningless death. And Jesus brings the salving reports of a meaning of spirit that is beyond these. There's something more than living a meaningless life. There's something more than dying a meaningless death. There is more possibility in us than that, and we shouldn't settle. And here endeth paragraph 10, and then he starts into the discussion of immortality in depth. So why don't we dig into that and see what happens? Paragraph 11, sentence 1 to 2. Immortality, of course, bears the refracted light of however many meanings life itself may have. It is nothing literal and definite. And what he's alluding to here is that for us, immortality is about a desire more than it's about a real condition. And because it's a desire, it's like a Rorschach test onto which we project our fantasies and fears, right? We're afraid of an immortality spent in hell. We long for an immortality spent in heaven. Although many people even just long to have the current life that they're enjoying go on forever, so they can enjoy it forever. They don't. He's going to talk about that in the sentences ahead. But in any of these cases, it's not like the oak where we actually have an actual tree and we can look at it, we can investigate it and have that tree tell us what it is. In the case of immortality, nobody lives forever, so we don't know what this thing is that we're longing for, and thus it becomes the screen on which we project our desires and fears. He says, but to teach to the many a subtle moral truth is to be heard by them as only appealing to their gross fears and desires. Right? He's alluding back to paragraphs before, to that issue of prayer. And if somebody has a barbarian soul and can only think about goodies, and you try to get them to pray, they're going to pray for goodies. They can't help it. That's the level that they operate at. And implicit in this, although I wouldn't have read this 20 years ago in this text, but I feel like I'm getting to know Kenneth well enough to smell it here, is Heraclitus's line about eyes and ears make poor witnesses to men having barbarian souls, right? You can tell them a subtle truth, but it doesn't mean they can hear that subtle truth. They can only hear what their current level of character development prepares them to hear. And if they're living a dualic life and they're obsessed with their fears and their desires, then all they're going to hear in what you say is, how does that, affect my fears and desires? You saying something I want or something I'm afraid of? It must be one or the other, somewhere in there. You get that flatland effect. You're trying to tell them something profound, and they're rendering it down into a Christmas wish list. The more cravenly emotionalist or slavish the mentality of an individual, the more that individual makes every word he hears complicitous with his own delusions. Now, delusion is a Kierkegaard reference with Kenneth, always is. Delusion is a state of mind in which the thing you most need to think in order to escape the delusion is the thing you absolutely can't think. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a delusion. This isn't the quote, but I'm paraphrasing the Kierkegaard quote. Kierkegaard is one of our masters of delusion. He spends a lot of time writing about how does it operate on us. And whenever he's writing about delusion, Kenneth is reading that as also applying to ideologies. People who've been programmed into a belief system, whether it's fascism, whether it's Marxism, whether it's moral relativism, whatever it is, they do the exact same thing. They turn everything you say into a Rorschach test on which they project their own ideology, and they look for confirmation that their ideology is true, that they're already correct about the world, that they don't need to learn anything new from you, that they're looking for confirmation of their belief system. And that's the way a delusion works. That's the way an ideology works. And what Kenneth is doing here when he says the Kierkegaard spent time as a dreamer, yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he's writing what he knows. He starts out his career with an idealized concept of Lutheran Christianity, or I think it's Lutheranism. I can't remember what form of Christianity he subscribed to.
State Church, Luther.
Thank you. But by the time he gets to the end of his career, he's become a cranky old man throwing stones, right? He writes his attack on Christendom going, what the hell is wrong with us? Aren't we supposed to be Christians? Does any of this behavior we're engaging in look like Christian behavior to you? And if it does, have you forgotten what Jesus said? Because I don't think Jesus would agree that any of our behavior is Christian. We need to grow the hell up. So there is a sense in which by the time he's writing Attack on Christendom at the end of his life, he definitely feels he spent a bunch of time as a dreamer, for sure. And he's had the scales fall from his eyes, and now he wants to come from the desert and preach the message that nobody wants to hear. And that was not his most popular work. Yeah, here lies an individual for sure. So Anyway, this issue, the more cravenly emotionalist or slavish the mentality of an individual. So cravenly emotionalist, we're talking dualic, right? We're talking the life of immersion in experience and feelings. It says, or slavish the mentality. Now, this is where the phrase is ambiguous. Whenever you're reading Kenneth and he's talking about the limits of the slavish mind, if he sat back and reflected, he would say both the dualic and the banausic mentality are equally slavish. One of them is ruled by appetites and desires and experiences. The other is ruled by calculations and systems and ideologies, delusions, intellectual mental delusions. He says, and they're both half-witted strategies for life. And in saying this, he's certainly echoing Kierkegaard, among others, but also Hegel and so forth. But when it comes time to put pen to paper or finger to keyboard, Kenneth doesn't always say both halves. I've said this before. I think the last time I belabored this was about a year ago, but I'm going to belabor it here again, because I think there's evidence here that Kenneth was in a little bit of a hurry, and he's stressing the appetitive side of things in this paragraph. But his unconscious is trying to remind him not to forget about the ideological side. The fact that he brings up delusions, right? Delusions and ideologies are tied every bit as much to Banalsea in Kenneth's mind as they are to Dulea. And so I think what he's doing is he's hitting the dualic side harder than he means to in this text. He means to hit them both equally hard. The two half-witted strategies for life are equally delusory, and they equally have this problem of converting the truth into a flatland that fits within their half-witted framework. But he didn't quite say both of them, but I think he meant them. And delusion is part of the way you know that. Kierkegaard, he is absolutely clear that all parts of the aesthetic personality, both the emotionalist experiential side and the overly analytical systematizing side, are equally delusory. Despite the fact that the Banausic mind believes that it is liberated from the appetite of life, and that therefore now it sees objectively and truly. Kierkegaard is one of the best philosophers for slamming those pretensions down and saying, "Oh, no, 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 no! The belief that you see objectively is every bit as delusory as the belief of the appetitive person that his desires represent the truth." Right? Because it is not given to humanity to see the world objectively, and the certainty that you do is among the worst delusions you can have. So Kenneth is with the use of the word delusion, Kenneth is invoking all of this. Yeah, I wouldn't want to try to compare Kierkegaard and Nietzsche's intellects. They both do incredibly important service in amplifying but also correcting Hegel. And I'm responding to Stephen's comment. I'm sure people claim it, but it's also the case that they're both difficult to read, but in completely different ways, right? Nietzsche's writing in a compressed form, and he's changing his mind over time. And can you keep track of when he's changed his mind and when you haven't? At what point are you reading based on an interpretation from 3 years ago that he doesn't hold anymore? It is a really easy mistake to make with Nietzsche.
Oh,
But
forgive me, but the point was the claim is that Kierkegaard, it's generally believed Kierkegaard was actually almost on the level of Nietzsche. This is what philosophers claim.
Oh, tad
That
short.
he was almost as good at the six gun as
Got it.
Nietzsche was.
Got
So,
it.
you might see Kierkegaard and say, oh, who's this silly little guy running around Copenhagen? And that was the view I held, but people have studied him and say, this guy was almost on the level of Nietzsche.
Yeah, he's a genius. He's a genius.
Well, also mad,
Also
but
mad.
also a genius.
they go together frequently, right? And from the perspective of the dominant society, of course, a genius is going to seem mad. You start asking questions about the value system of the society, and the society will not hesitate to chuck you into the mental institution. In Kierkegaard, what makes Kierkegaard a tough read is that he's so sarcastic. He writes these dialogues, and frequently neither participant in the dialogue is someone he admires. He's writing the dialogue to illustrate the stupidity of two different modes of thought. as they try to have a conversation and misunderstand each other. And you, the reader, and I say I'm talking about myself, can easily read those passages and think that he's literally telling you how things are, when what he's saying is not unlike when Plato says, "Oh, here's how this general defines bravery and courage." And if you don't know that that was the general who ran away from a battle, you don't understand he's being sarcastic. And this is what it's like to read Kierkegaard. It's just like he's constantly being sarcastic for a purpose, to illustrate the limitations of that mentality. And yet it's often easy to overlook it and think that he's literally saying the things his characters are saying. So he could be a tough read, just like Nietzsche can be a tough read. But yeah, I mean, he's talking about delusion. He's talking about the inability to see things as they are, but the way a barbarian character will translate it into the flatland of one's own barbarism and therefore misunderstand things. All of this is part of that overall problem that Kenneth focuses on, that eristic truths and insights can't be communicated to either Dulea or to Banausoi. They will both flatten what you've said, each into their own characteristic mode, either the highly abstracted, intellectualized, systematizing side, or the highly emotive, appetitive side. And in either case, all the coherency and juice of the full dialectic of the heuristic truth has been lost. It's like you handed someone a bow and arrow and they reduced it down to a string, which they then wound around a spool and said, "This is what you said." And you're like, "Oh God, no." Or they throw the string away and now they have a piece of wood and they stick it on a fire and say, "Ooh, this is nice. I can warm my hands." And again, you're shaking your hand going, "You could be pursuing the deer in the forest and bringing home game, but no, you just burned that bow because you didn't understand what you were looking at. You didn't get the dialectic that was at work here." Uh, this, so, what does that mean for sentences 1 and 2 of paragraph 11? What he's exploring here is the idea that if there is such a thing as immortality, if there's something meaningful here and not just an abstraction, the problem is that every time a doulos or a Banausos hears you say immortality, they have stripped out of it all of the meaning that occupies a dimension outside of their experience, and they've reduced it down to something that will fit. It's the Procrustean bed at work. And therefore, every time someone starts talking about immortality, you can assume that the dialogue is in trouble. Well, any communication that could have happened here has gone off the rails. It's going to be very hard for us to comprehend one another. And then, shall we continue with sentences 3 and 5? We are just tearing through this text today. Rhetoric. Notice he quoted immortality. Now he's quoting rhetoric. Rhetoric is famously the art of telling people what they want to hear, of controlling crowds through their pre-existing appetites and prejudices. Now, when he says that, he's not talking about Aristotle's definition of rhetoric as a tool that Aristotle can use to try to make difficult truths approachable. He's talking about the sophistic game of rhetoric, by which some sophists brag that they could make the lesser argument appear the greater one. They could make the evil appear to be the good, and that for a price, they will teach you how to do that. You can win arguments against people who actually understand things by, frustrating them rhetorically. You can get to where the guy might be right, but nobody in the crowd agrees with him. They all agree with you. Even though you're full of shit, you have the crowd on your side. Woo! This is sophistry. And that's why he put the quotes around it. It's like there's two rhetorics. There is the rhetoric that's meant to be in service to health, and so for Sune, that an Aristos would value, and then there is the rhetoric that a sophist would value as a way to win, because winners win. and they beat you. Now everybody likes them, so you're the loser. Ha ha, loser. This is kind of all he's alluding to all of this, right? And somewhere I see Diogenes wandering through a crowd with a lantern in broad daylight. He continues, although it may be an art as a few practice it, and he means Aristoi, it is indeed almost the whole of demotic or popular speech. Language is no more than a tool of one's own and others' appetites, and most people cultivate it no further than will serve this purpose. How do I get what I want? It's something that comes up in American politics all the time. I see all these well-meaning people listening to political speeches and then thinking, that person obviously just doesn't understand something. I need to get a conversation going with them. And then I can explain the thing that they don't understand. And then we will understand each other and we'll have peace. And it's like, wow, you don't understand how they use language at all. They could care less what's real. They don't want peace. They're trying to win. They may not believe a single word they just said. But their studies show that if they deploy these terms, they will mobilize enough people to support them that they can win the election. The idea of language as a means to understanding and peace is a foreign language to vast numbers of people. They absolutely do not use language that way, ever. But you get these well-meaning people who assume, well, why would anybody not use language to try to understand? It's like, yeah, well, it's a shock. Someday it'll rock your world when you finally let it into your heart and you realize how little most people care about genuinely understanding or achieving peace. They don't want any of that. They want to win. I want a promotion. I want that girlfriend. I want to beat my opponent. That's all my choices around language are designed to those immediate ends. And if I have to trample reality to get there, well, who cares? Reality isn't real. Only getting what I want is real. It is a horror when you fully accept how many people use language like that. When he says this, Kenneth writes this with a laugh, but it's a bitter laugh because Kenneth wants to use language to communicate and understand. And he is as horrified as I am about how few people want to use it that way. The vast majority of the chattering that goes on is mine, me. You suck, I win. It's disturbing. Because we could be so much better than this. Going back to the earlier sentences, Jesus's message, awaken your heart to life and hope. It could be so much better than this. It doesn't have to be like this. We shouldn't have to settle for this. All of this is, he just wrote, literally, when he was writing this text, he just wrote those other sentences right before he wrote this. It's what's on his mind when he's talking about, how difficult this is. He's like, this is deeply frustrating. Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, it's actually interesting how the idea of even the use of words, like the use of words to actually win an argument versus actually to do an internal dialogue of actually understanding the self. And I think that that's one of the main points that's kind of being made. It's this idea of I want to I just want to win the argument, when the crowd would get whatever I want. Interesting enough, like I've kind of seen this distortion up close. There was I know of groups, I'll just say, that that are basically more along the lines for corporate interests, which again, to each his own, but they use Aristotle's poetics and storytelling in a way to actually convince people to do something that they would not otherwise do based off of reality. So in other words, put it into a narrative that fits. Now, the narrative could very well be a good one. I mean, it could end up, being a way of communicating a good idea. But in the context that it was being used, it was almost being used in a sense, the manipulative type of fashion. So that's where it's kind of noticed, the idea of using, language in a way that would actually be more to the benefit of only you personally versus this idea of actually how does it allow you to get to a conclusion that's better for everyone involved, including yourself in that particular instance. And it's going back to the idea of just satisfying your personal desires and not necessarily having a sincere inquiry. So I think that it's also interesting, the idea of rhetoric in general. Rhetoric is when you're using it to convince people of something that is obviously not true, not to communicate, as you'd mentioned, a clear idea, but you're using it in the sense to to convince people to go along with you. But there's also rhetoric in the sense that you can use language as a self-defense mechanism as well, and as a way of kind of inquiring whether or not someone is telling you something is true. So that there's that other aspect of it, is how it can actually, it has this dual use, but people will decide to use it as, something that is just to get what they desire. But the real use of it, the genuinely good use of it, would be to inquire what you're being told, to interrogate it in a way that's healthy. So you have these two ways of language and being used in the sense of storytelling and in rhetoric, and how they can both lead to this perversion of reality. And then obviously Kenneth is using this in the context of even how belief systems and other things can be skewed based off of that, the use of these words, essentially. And one of the most important things that you'll see is often the battles within belief systems is like, what type of text, or what's your translation? And the reason that is because the words matter. And so the translation has to be to fit the narrative as you want it to fit. So, I mean, and as opposed to looking at it is, are you taking it from a literalist perspective or whatever it may be? In that, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter, but it's more about how do you get it to benefit you. And that's why even it even changes the words and ceremonies, because it also changes people's perception of what's real. So especially if you're repeating something enough, and then it becomes almost indoctrinated.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting because my cats try to communicate with me. Well, they do communicate with me multiple times every day, and they are talking about their desires. Is it time for breakfast yet, Papa? Papa, I want my breakfast. And I don't mind that they're talking about their appetites. They're being very forthright about it. And we can have a conversation because I comprehend what they're doing and they comprehend what they do. They know that they're trying to get me to feed them, right? And I know that they're trying to get me to feed them, and we can have an agreement. Yeah, I'm going to feed you. This is good. You can communicate if people can be honest about what they're doing, even if they're operating on a more flatland level than you are. You can still have a conversation that in the end pleases everybody. I like to feed my cats. They like to be fed. We just had a conversation. It worked out great. The problem is with people who don't know that that's why they're talking. They don't know why they say the things they do. They don't know why they think the things they do. They're sort of they're operating with this wider frame of possibilities that they're then personally sabotaging in themselves. And they're unconsciously sabotaging in themselves. So they don't know that they aren't doing things for the good of humanity, or that they aren't doing things out of love. Torquemada thinks he's torturing out of love, and he doesn't know why he's really doing it. He's deeply confused. And the problem is, with all that brain power that Homo sapiens has, when they confuse themselves that much, they don't just confuse themselves, they confuse everybody around them. And like, we don't know how to engage with them. Are you trying to have a philosophical discussion? Are you trying to have a political discussion? Are we trying to talk practically about the right way to saw wood if you want to build something? Or are we talking about the fact that you're bored and just want to be entertained? And, they'll tell you it's anything but the last thing. and draw you into a conversation that ultimately is based on false premises, not just because they're trying to lie to you, but because they're absolutely confused about who they are and what they want. And for those of us who do everything in our power to try to use language strictly as a tool of truth and communication, knowing how hard it is for people to achieve, for myself, to how hard is it for me to get a grasp on the truth? It's everything I can do using all my powers to have even the most tenuous grasp. Somebody starts jarring my hand, and it does not take much before I have no fucking idea where the truth is in this conversation. You know, it's like it is way too easy for me to get confused about these things, even despite, all my efforts to the contrary. And I think that's part of where some of the difficulty comes from. So a lot of society and a lot of people might be happier if people could just figure out what level they were operating on and what it was they really wanted and say it clearly. A lot of people might be happy to give it to them. It's just like, at least now we know what you're trying for. But but if you thought that becoming president was going to make you happy, I don't know what to tell you, buddy. You don't have a governing bone in you. There's no part of you that wants to govern. You're just completely confused about why you're doing the things that you're doing. And it makes it hard for the rest of us to figure out what the hell to do.
Yeah. I if I may, the idea of automatic too, this idea of automatic and thoughts, how we go on automatic, which is completely understandable, but in a way, I completely understand why people would go into this. It's a way of serving, kind of conserving energy. It's just, you almost have a set of maxims that you're kind of referring to as, that's in a way that the way prayer even works to some degree, is that, that is also a way of making it very difficult to, that's even a perverted way of using language in the sense that, how do you really interrogate what it is that you believe at that particular moment, because you're repeating it over and over and over, that then the way it's being used by you, but the way it's also being directed towards you. I mean, that's the other part of it, in the sense that and that's how it's used as a tool to get what you want versus actually to get. And I mean, politicians repeat continuously in order to convince people that of something that is true. And that's where one of those instances that you kind of see that. So this idea of automatic, or creating almost a stimulus and response type of in a person, so that they almost, kind of, you're just repeating something. That's the use of language in a perverted way.
And it doesn't help that our grasp on the truth is so affected by that Rorschach test quality. I mean, at least when you look at a Rorschach test, you're looking at a Rorschach test. It's
Right.
like, here, look at the ink blot. But I was just looking at just the other day on my Facebook feed. There again is the dress blue and white, or is it black and gold? And I was looking at that thing, scratching my head, trying to think about, if you don't know that you're engaged in a Rorschach test, how are you going to think to question your
Right.
interpretation? You don't know this is a test. The way that it looks to you just seems obviously true. And that's the condition, according to Kierkegaard, that is the condition of being stuck in a delusion. It's not that, like, oh my God, I'm having all these problems, I must be in a delusion. It's no, you're sure of yourself. You're looking right at reality, and it's obvious how things are. And the fact that other people disagree with you just means they're stupid or crazy or something. I mean, what's wrong with them? How come they can't see the same dress you do? It must be malice. Maybe they really do see the same dress and they're just lying to me. I mean, people come up with all these explanations to try to make sense of it because they aren't aware of the enormous interpretive framework they've brought to bear on even the simple act of looking at a photograph.
Mm-hmm.
They just assume I must be perceiving reality.
In a way, the automatic thoughts are like the night of resignation.
Yeah.
Essentially, in Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
essentially what it is. So you're giving away your autonomy.
Yeah. And that's definitely what Kenneth is talking about in paragraph 11. That's the issue. Thank you, Joe. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, when I was about 20, I'd spent my teenage years thinking heaps of abstract thoughts, and it was a bit like a cantilever. It's like that pile of books. You got one abstract thought, and then you find you can put another abstract thought, and eventually you got a bridge, although you're going to reach a point where the whole thing collapses. And it's fun and almost useful to think abstractly or excessively abstractly, but I decided to try and think more concretely. And it does change the way your mind works. There's a local guy in our existential group, and he is pretty smart. He is an academic, but he's unemployable. He did have a job at one stage, but he seemed to screw it up. But he's got all gongs and whistles when it comes to expressing himself as an academic. He's quite smart. Yeah, he's a failure. And he comes to the meetings and he'll be on the Zoom and saying, well, I'm the greatest historian in Australia. And even all the rest of the nutcases are going, no, not that one, please don't go there.
I know you're not the greatest historian because I am.
Anyway, he'll get on the Facebook for, the existential society. He's just throwing thing after thing. And no, there is a good mind there that's, got all the nuts and bolts in the proper place. But he's taken off the aircraft carrier in the wrong direction. That was a beautiful flight, but you just missed step one. Everything else was great, but step one was terrible. And but he's obsessed that he's an academic intellectual, and he's the class of people that's going to solve all the world's problems because they will find the answers. But there's a problem there. It's like that, it's like that guy in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy who said, well, did you miss something with the question when you've got the answer? That you might have an answer which doesn't really fit you didn't understand the question in the first place. And this sort of, I see it everywhere in these philosophy groups that people are obsessed with the intellect like I was when I was a teenager. And the abstract intellect, yeah, it's certainly there's a lot of stuff there which is useful, but it is not the facts. It's a tool. And if you think you can mine up in that abstract space and you'll find the truth, most of the time you're just going to be a cat chasing your own tail. And what is the abstract thinker going to say? Look, I can see that tail there. Why aren't I catching it? I'm just not going fast enough. Yeah, and this sums up probably the whole of the Western world's academia. No matter how smart you and clever you are, there's certain realities that are only understood by smashing into that brick wall. I mean, this is what I tell people, quite smart people will not learn from their mistakes as long as they can get away with it, because being in that mistake is their comfort zone. They don't want to step outside of it. If I can keep on getting away with being wrong, we're cool. It's only the day where reality smacks them in the face back and they fall over and they're on the ground, they start to realize that my strategy might need some reformulation.
Yes.
I guess you sort of get what I'm getting at there, Rick.
Yes.
You've encountered it quite often.
I've done it myself.
I know I've done it myself. I'm still doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I mean, there's Aeschylus all over what you just said. Drop by drop, wisdom is distilled from pain. If only we could look at a situation and immediately learn where we were wrong and move on. And how many times, are we so sure of ourselves? The only possible way to learn is to just, as you say, headlong into the wall and then wondering what the hell we're doing on the ground. It's like, ow! Evidently, this is what it takes to knock some sense into my head. Alas. It's funny because I mean, what is it, 25, 20, maybe 2,400 years ago? Aeschylus wrote that, and it's still the level of mistake we're making today.
Could you put his name in the chat?
Oh yeah, Aeschylus. Yeah, it's his Oresteia, the trilogy of tragedies, starting with the Agamemnon. And that's the one that has the quote, drop by drop, wisdom is distilled from pain. So this is the blessing of Zeus. The blessing of Zeus is no matter how hard-headed we are, there is still at least one path to wisdom open to us if we can have the grace to take it, which is, yeah, if you can't learn any other way, you could blunder spectacularly. And the pain itself might dilate your mind enough to wonder. I wonder, is it possible I'm not 100% right about everything? As I'm sitting here lying in the ground wondering why I didn't make it over the wall. Maybe I don't have a complete grasp of this situation. Yeah. It's funny, there's a certain amount we can learn from watching other people, but boy, the lessons we learn from our own blunders, they really stick with us. That's the juicy stuff. Hearing you talk about, the earlier stage in your life when you were over intellectualizing, all I could think of myself in the 20s when I thought I could think my way through to solve any problem. And I was sure of it. I mean, I had people pitching me, solve the problems in Israel. I had people pitching me solve the problems in Ireland. And I thought I could do it. I would just sit there and think my way to a solution. And wow, I've come a long way since then. I'm like, I don't even know if I can make a sandwich. I'll be happy if I can dress myself.
Oh, that was Donald Trump recently coming back from Eastern Europe.
Yes.
These guys really hate each other.
Huh. Who knew? Ari, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Well, first of all, that was hilarious. Thanks for sharing, Stephen. And Rick, I've learned a tremendous amount about delusion and Kierkegaard. This is fantastic. But actually, I want to go back to, and I got disconnected, so I want to go back to the chat, but I can't see the chat so well. But it was the portion about Jesus reviving the dead language of like joy and gratitude.
Yes, I'll post that again.
Yeah. But essentially, I'm going to frame this in something that I believe Joe, and again, this is a really early part of the conversation, so it's hard to remember, a little while back, talking about, oh yeah, you're talking about the horror movie, and to some degree, I was thinking about um, essentially this form of trying to just do things for love out of really any sort of deliberate behavior and very much an automatic. To me, this is what I would hear this night of resignation similarly, but also it's called the default mode network in the brain, right? This is the automatic stuff. And to me, this is like you're saying with the Benousoi and the Douloi, like maybe one of those two forms of slavery, actually, that this guy is a slave to his feelings. In this case, it's serving love. And it reminds me of a great essay by Rabbi Sachs about freedom, the two types of freedom. He's going to talk about Isaiah Berlin. He's also going to put it in the context of Viktor Frankl. And essentially that in Hebrew, actually, it's this whole thing he talks about in the story of it's a Passover thing of like leaving Egypt is called chofesh, which is like essentially literally freedom from. Like when a slave is removed from his master, now he could do anything. But if he's, let's say, destitute, he might choose to be a slave still because that's the only way he gets bread. So is he really free? So in this idea of Isaiah Berlin is that's freedom from. You removed all the boundaries, but you did give the person any sort of freedom to, any ability to actually live in a thriving way, which requires resources and other things. But I think what we're talking about is also one of the big questions of freedom and slavery. is that living a life just for yourself is still just being a slave to yourself. And so essentially, you'd say living for any sort of master, any sort of idea, you're a slave to that idea. And this is what Viktor Frankl specifically says in a good way in Man's Search for Meaning, that the door to happiness opens outward, and that essentially we only find happiness by serving things that are bigger than ourselves. That's what meaning is. So in this case, I'd say the sophor sune is, well, what's the right thing to serve that's bigger than yourself, right? If it's somehow serving a loving father who's going to give you the keys to the kingdom and teach you how to run the thing with sophor sune because he's an Aristos, like fantastic. I want to serve that guy because he's going to teach me how to live and thrive and become my own thriving oak tree. And he was a big thriving oak tree, right? Right. So this is fantastic. But on the other hand, if I have a tyrant or an abusive father, someone I'm serving them that's going to be harmful to me, then I don't want to serve them. And how do I know the difference? This seems to be what sophor sune would know. Someone with sophor sune would know, I'm going to serve the master who's actually going to benefit me because they're like some sort of a we versus an I or whatever it is, that they want me to serve them actually improves me. Like, for instance, maybe becoming a better, eventually taking over the business, or at least having a promotion, or whatever it is, it's going to provide me with a symbiotic relationship that's using what Joe would say, using words for co-creation of a shared reality rather than some sort of manipulating rhetorical, very sophistry. Like, again, the Banausoi in this case, if I'm getting them wrong, yeah, the Banausoi, who just want to use words to systematize everything and just not be wrong, right? They just want to never be wrong. So they're slaves, what I call being a slave to victory. They need to be right, and they're not interested in truth, right? And so you go back to what's the type of freedom you want. I think I just smuggled in there. The freedom you want is someone who's more interested in looking for truth and making it work rather than being right and having their way. And this is more like being a we and less of an I, but it goes to being a strong I as well. You need someone who's going to strongly contribute. And so this goes to Isaiah Berlin's Freedom 2. Freedom 2 is essentially creating a narrative path where you're setting your own constraints, and that any finite being interacting with a nearly infinite set of choices needs to create essentially just a few data points that are going to be arbitrarily meaningful, and you have to stick to those to measure if they're going right or not. And they have to be generally representative, like how I feel or how much I'm eating or how long I'm living. But essentially, these are data points that are impossible to really know about, and we just craft a narrative. And that essentially that narrative is the freedom to create a path forward. And essentially you want to hopefully test it, that it's going to work out. And somehow sophor sune people know how to look further and essentially predict further or make better hypothesis testing for the future in a way to really use their wisdom. But essentially they removed enough of the freedom from, they're no longer shackles to a master. But I would say from one of the famous things of the Passover story, you have 4 questions. And one of these versions of the question in ancient times went like this, from the wicked child, which we don't use this anymore because it's a really good, there's the wise child, the wicked child, and whatever, the innocent child and the one who can't ask. But the wicked child now is just like kind of like a narrative bad guy. But the older version in the Talmud, actually, the wicked child says something like this: like, we left to be slaves in Egypt, but why are now you're telling us that we're supposed to be a slave to God? It's called an Eved Pharaoh and an Eved Hashem. So I'm a slave to God. And like, this sounds like I just went from one set of chains to another. Why would I have done this? This isn't freedom. This is just another form of misery. And it's a really hard question. And essentially it goes to this idea of all positive freedom, all life is going to be serving something bigger than yourself, which is a type of slavery. And if you're not serving that, you're just serving yourself, which is another type of slavery. So at the end of the day, what type of slave are you going to be? Who are you going to serve and why? This goes to Joe's agency versus contingency. Yeah, there's certain contingencies I can't get around. But if I have more agency, which then goes back to what Jesus is really doing here, he's bringing back the agency of love and gratitude. That was a dead thing. And to serve whatever out of love and gratitude is a much bigger, more fulfilling, gnostic rather than noetic sort of perspective. And I feel like this is what Jesus is doing, and this is what Kenneth is doing in the text, to go all the way back to Kenneth in the text. He's allowing a person to avoid the slavery trap of Rome, which is I'm either a Banausoi or a Douloi. Well, now I can be a slave to gratitude or, joy. What a different type of slavery, right? But at the same time, it's not a slavery in the sense that I'm choosing what type of slave I'm going to be. I'm going to cultivate my own daimon of what I'm going to cultivate, what kind of character I am. That's my slavery. But I'm going to choose to some degree what kind of slave I'm going to be. And in this case, I can bring in, which is totally magical thinking, this idea that I could just serve love or joy and gratitude, not love, because love is this thing about sacrifice, which we didn't get to. But anyways, I wanted to bring that back to the text, that I think this is what Kenneth is really describing
Yes.
about Jesus here. He's taking away a certain type of slavery. He's restoring their freedom, which is, again, this idea of freedom to versus freedom from. He's not just taking away the freedom from. He's actually not doing anything for the freedom from. They still have all of their chains, but he's giving them a freedom to, which is usually most people like Iser Berlin say you have to have the other way around first. You have to give the means of production before you can create a narrative about the means of production, or you have to change the material cause before you can change the final cause. And this is Jesus doing it all backwards.
Yes.
It's believing is seeing rather than seeing is believing. The mind makes it true as the delusion. We can craft a new delusion, and therefore there's a new possibility space.
Yes. That's exactly what Ken is talking about. You got it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
And
Thanks.
thanks for saying it the way you did, because I mean, it really underscores the issues at stake here. You make me think of the way Hegel describes the dualic way of life, or the experiential way of life. He calls it being in itself. There's no interpretation. The cheetah is what it is. The acorn is what it is. And it's not saying, I wonder what sort of cheetah I am. It
That sounds
doesn't
like
have a
Das
recipe.
Ein, though. Is that
Say that
also
again?
like Das Ein and being in time, right? This
Heidegger is certainly playing on these things.
right? But it sounded like you were actually saying Heidegger more than
But it's
anybody else.
Hegel. He
I'm
says
curious.
being in itself.
Okay.
That's his ontology is based on the same dialectic that we've talked about
Okay.
before. And he says when you are a wholly begriff being, then you are synonymous with your experiences. You have no part of your mind outside of what you're experiencing. And so therefore the sum totality of your spirit and character, it coincides with what's happening to you and what you're doing. And he calls this being in itself because there's no interpretive framework left. The being is wholly included within itself. Whereas when you negate that to create the space to have Verstand, to think analytically and abstractly about things, he says you're distancing yourself from being in itself, and you still exist. It's not like, I mean, that's still a tether to your reality of your body and where you are, but now you're creating a larger and larger interpretive framework around that existence. And that interpretive framework is almost always, there's a reason why Kierkegaard calls it the aesthetic life. It's designed, it's chosen, it's it's it is an act of will to say, this is what my life means and what I should be doing. If I'm supposed to be the world's fastest runner, if I'm supposed to be the greatest shipbuilder among the Vikings, if I'm supposed to be the greatest rabbinical Talmudic scholar, whatever it is, you're creating a recipe for yourself, an interpretive framework that says what your oughts and ought nots are. And this is the abstract realm of Verstand, in which you're systematizing. And the danger, says Hegel, of course, is that you become so divorced from being in itself, you become entirely enmeshed in this abstract systematizing world, that what you believe about yourself less represents reality than it does your intentions. It is what you plan for your life becomes the only part of yourself that you can see. Like those parents who can't see what their kids really want and are always trying to make their kids live the life that the parent wished they'd had when they were younger. You have to practice the piano. Then you have to go to swim lessons. You have to get A's. All these things I wanted for my life, I now want them for your life. And I'm so obsessed with what I want for you that I'm unable to see who are you in and of yourself. What do you actually love and care about? This is that, I've experienced some of this, or many of us have either experienced it or witnessed it up close hand. It's a very common thing. So So Hegel calls the mode of Verstand, when you exist in that mode where it's all about your recipes for yourself and your plans for yourself and the interpretation you have of yourself, he calls it being for itself instead of being in itself. Being in itself is the Begriff life, in which your mind coexists with your experience. Being for itself is the Verstand life, where you are so caught up with what you have planned for yourself that you are losing track of who you actually are in your innate character. It's all become these abstractions. And then he says the synthesis of the two that overcomes them, the heuristic life, Vernunft. uh, he says this is where you put the dialectic back together, because each of them has half of the answers. And when you recreate the palintropy to make a whole mind that uses both faculties, he calls it being in and for itself. You are able to coexist with your life and have plans for it at the same time without either one crowding out the other. And you pit them against each other to critique each other, so that you can kind of see. And so the freedom, there's sort of a freedom from, is what you want when you're trying to escape the pathos of the Begriff life. I'm tired of being treated like a slave. I'm tired of the hunger. I'm tired of the misery. I want out of that. Freedom from is the desire to escape that and not experience that anymore. But freedom to is the goal life, right? What is it that you want to do with this freedom? What is it you want to accomplish? You can't just sit in a corner like a plant and absorb sunlight. You need to act and will in the world and plan and strive. You need praxis, and thus the freedom too becomes a thing. So if Hegel were using this terminology, I feel like he would say that the escape out of the Banausic life of Verstand into the heuristic life is the desire to not just have freedom from and not just have freedom to, but to have freedom from and to. That's how he given that that's what he does with being in itself and being for itself, synthesizing into being in and for itself. I suspect he would say freedom from and to would be his characterization of the kind of freedom that characterizes the heuristic lifestyle. So I know I'm just riffing on what you said, but I wasn't sure how recently we talked about being in itself and being from it for itself. So I hope that was helpful. And if not, we'll move right along and go right back to the text. Let's sweep that under the rug and on we go. Let's see, where were we? We were.
I really enjoyed your your thing about the Griff and I gotta remember that, or you can maybe send me to a source that, because these terms are hard to remember. The Griff and Verstand, and then being in itself for it is fantastic. But if I do like when you talk about that. So.
Oh, good. Okay, and I just misspelled Vernunft. Let me fix that in the text. So there's Begriff, Verstand, and Vernunft, and that's the first dialectic. That's the dialectic of the mind and the modes of the mind. And then his ontology equivalent to that is being in itself, being for itself, and being in and for itself. And you can Google those terms and find discussions of them. People get this part of Hegel, and part of it is that the translations, for being in itself, being for itself, and being in and for itself. If you look at the German, those are literally the words. I mean, this is one of the few places where we don't mistranslate Hegel. English is able to represent these words, and so this is actually a useful bit of translation into the English. All right, well let's dive back into the text, and we'll do more Hegelian dialectics later. But it's worth remembering that whenever Kenneth is writing, he's carrying with him a load of the Greeks and of Hegel and of Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Arendt and others. And if you carry those things too and sort of keep them at your fingertips while you're reading Kenneth, you'll spot opportunities to match up his wording with famous quotes out of those things. And you will almost never be wrong if you do that, because he's got these things in his head. Every chapter he writes in this book, before he wrote that chapter, he went through his books of quotations and he made 1 to 3 pages of quotes, famous quotes. Here's William Blake. Here's Mark. I like this quote from Kierkegaard. Here's a little bit of Plato. He puts them all together because they're all on the theme that he wants to talk about. And then when he's writing his text, those things work their way into the text. Sometimes he'll just directly say, like William Blake said, as a man is, so he sees. And sometimes he won't. And he'll just talk about the problem of being and seeing. And you either do or don't pick up how close that is to the William Blake quote that he was using as scaffolding when he was writing. And I know he does this because we've talked about it, he and I. But I also know he does it because, for a few of his works, I was lucky enough to get a copy of some of his pages where he had written a bunch of quotes. And then I could read the chapter and go, holy crap, that is what he does. He does, in fact, riff off of these collections of juicy. He says choice, although he likes to pronounce it churse. These churse quotes that sort of drive these things, and that becomes the interpretive framework he uses them like strange attractors as he writes his narrative. So, all right, well, let's go on. Paragraph 11, sentence 6. Premier among the fears so profound as to be unspeakable for most people is the fear of dying, of ceasing to see or feel or desire or act. Most people do not grasp the absurdity of squandering one's precious little life, spoiling the whole quality by obsessing about losing it. Which, yes, the limits on our lives serve a salutary natural purpose and should appeal to our natural wisdom, not least of all by imbuing life with gravity and weight that should make us take it seriously and sanely and glean what is most of value. And you should be hearing, now, this is the medieval section, you should be hearing memento mori right about now, right? Because that is one of his touchstones. And for those who don't know what the hell I'm talking about, I'll just drop a link to the Wikipedia article just as a little as just a little thing to follow up on. And that is the medieval practice of keeping a skull on your desk. If you were a sage or a scholar, you put a skull on your desk. And the purpose of the skull is to remind you, however much you may love your life, this too shall pass. And therefore, when choosing how to spend your time, choose carefully. Don't squander it. You're never going to get it back. You just get this one pass. And ask yourself, for each thing that you're getting into, is this worth burning through this day for this purpose? Or should I maybe do something that will be more meaningful, more healthy, make a bigger impact, be more profound? And it's not that you can't laugh. Kenneth loves to laugh. It's that, if laughter is part of what should be in your life, then don't forget to make room for the laughter. But at any point, go through the process of thinking about the meaning and profundity and value of things. So this is what he's alluding to when he's talking about don't be so afraid to lose your life that you waste your life fearing what's going to come anyway, whether you're afraid of it or not. Memento mori is all over this. This is definitely a Kenneth bit here. And we'll and remember, this is the paragraph about immortality. And so what is the purpose of the concept of immortality? And to what extent, will a doulos or a banauso see that the purpose of immortality is to get what I want, and what I want is not to die. And so therefore, I want a religion to tell me that I don't have to die. And that's the religion I'm going to join. And Kenneth is saying, Jesus could easily have been talking about immortality for an entirely different purpose. It could be about learning to understand the difference between the sacred and the profane, and learning to care about what's sacred, to care about doing the right thing, because tick-tock, you've only got so much time. Why tear each other down when you could use this opportunity to build each other up? Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, just one of the things that I actually find to be even more perverted than any kind of distinction of this living forever is literally people that are funding living forever movements, in the sense that I mean, you're not even considering what it is to live now. And so like it's completely defeating its own purpose. And so, I mean, and at least, any other idea of immortality, at least it's not ignoring the fact that you're not going to at least be here, like wherever you are right now. I mean, but that is like, I want to be here forever. And that's not healthy. And I'm being kind by saying it like that. I mean, it's mind boggling to me, because it's almost as if you can throw away of pursuing what is good, or even ethical, just because you want to be here forever, which personally, it's okay. It's not, forever is a long time. But anyway, I just find that to be interesting, because there's this other aspect of it that is the other extreme. It's not even the supernatural. It's not even outside of nature. It's like, no, and this is the part of a narrative of an idea of dominating nature, conquering nature, which is actually something even more perverted. And so that's where it's also, what do I need now, as opposed to like what is actually worth pursuing, what is good. And you can kind of get into the knowledge and wisdom distinction here, right? You know how to do something, and so it doesn't mean you do it. I mean, in this case, it's not even necessarily possible. I mean, you don't even necessarily. So I mean, forget that part about it. But I just think it's, to a certain degree, I find that to be the most perverted of approaches that there are. I mean, I don't have a problem with people trying to live a little longer and things are healthier and quality and all that stuff, but I mean, this whole forever thing is like, okay. And even if they make the argument, well, we should have the choice. No, I mean, it's, as Steve Jobs said, it was like, it's life's change agent. It's one of the best things that nature can give us, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a terrible gift, but it's a gift. And I guess there's another subtext to these sentences that I gotta drop into the chat, and that is Kenneth Smith's famous quote about religion and philosophy. There are only two kinds of philosophy, just as there are of religion: existentialist and escapist. This is his parable 306, The Good Soldier, from his unpublished book Minotaur. Minotaur would be his third book of parables to come after Otherwise in Webs, but it hasn't been published yet. But I have a copy, a draft copy, because I'm trying to help him get it done. And yeah, right. Yeah, David posted. I put that right on when we did the philosophy of Kenneth Smith presentation was it to the Australian Rationalist Society or Philosophical Society some years back. I put that right on the cover.
Existentialists.
That's it, the existentialist. Thank you.
You called existentialists rationalists, Rick.
My bad. I'm ashamed.
Oh, that's
ashamed.
very bad.
I'm so ashamed.
Watch out what meetings you go to. You might come.
I know.
Might not come back.
I'm so bad. And especially because that sabotages the entire point of his quote, which is, an existentialist turns to face the truth of our life as best we can. And if the truth is that we die, then an existentialist wants to face that and say, okay, we're going to die. But an escapist lets their desire and their ideology supersede reality and say, not me, I'm not going to die. I don't want to die, and therefore I won't die. I can stop it from happening. And either I'll stop it from happening by investing, $1 kajillion into life extension research, or I'll stop it from happening by changing my belief system to imagine that I don't have to die. I'm going to, sure, my body will die, but that's not the real me. The real me is the soul, and the soul will live forever. And this kind of thinking is escapist. It's about trying to escape our existential situation. And many philosophers, many philosophers over the last several thousand years have been just radically escapist in this sense, that they don't want reality to be real. And so they make their persuasive arguments to try to persuade you that it's not. John Donne, the poet, I don't know how many of you have studied English literature, but John Donne is a poet of two stages in his life, right? The early stage is Randy John Donne, who is writing poetry to seduce ladies' pants off. And he's got a whole bunch of poems he wrote, that are all about, hey, baby, this is the equivalent of Gary Larson's translations of birds singing in the forest. Hey, baby, hey, baby. It's all about, how do I get you into bed? And then he had an epiphany and he became a Christian. And after that, all of his stuff is about Christianity. And his famous one is, Death Be Not Proud, which is, haha, you don't have to die. We can, go to heaven. And so you're not so scary. I've beaten you. Jesus has beaten you, and I'm with Jesus, so I've beaten you. And in that, Kenneth would say, is that's an example of shifting to the escapist mode. It's like, I don't have to take seriously one of the most serious parts of my life. I can just pretend it won't happen. And that's the power of the will, right? This is the same thing that drives people into delusions and ideologies. This idea that when I alter my perspective to make things disappear or become unimportant, I tell myself that I have not fooled myself. I tell myself I've actually altered reality through the power of my will. The big has become small. I made it small. And if I can do that, what else can I do? I must be like a god. I can make anything go away. I just have to see it go away in my mind, and then it vanishes. There is an act of willfulness at the heart of escapist philosophy, according to Kenneth. And it's part of why, he takes escapist philosophers to the cleaners. He writes papers and critiques, to what extent is their fantastic line of argument, all their sophisticated education, to what extent is it being used for a childish purpose? Like, I don't want to feel pain. I don't want to die. So therefore, behold my beautiful theory that disproves the thing I don't like. It has to go away now because my logic is too good. And it's just the intellectual version of punching someone in the face because you don't like them. They don't go away. They're still a person. They're still right there. So all of this is this is the subtext here. He's talking about immortality in the same, just a paragraph after he was talking about prayer. He's talking about the way that we reduce these profound topics to something appetitive or willful, which in both cases is an act of mortal foolishness. Whereas, if we were wise, like the Greeks believed the gods to be, or like Jesus should be, then we don't pretend away the things we don't like. We dilate our character and our soul to be able to take in the full reality. And then we can try to, struggle to be wise, which we can't do as long as we're in denial. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, well, this is the risk in this bit of wisdom, and this was something Schelling was trying to warn about. He felt Hegel had gone on the wrong path a bit, and this is his point. Yes, existence precedes essence. This came from Schelling's talk. What he was trying to warn about, that when we discuss essentials, when we essentialize things, we're not actually with the real observation. We're projecting our ideas about what the essence is. And a lot of the time this works. Our culture is built on essentializing, and a lot of it works, but there's always that risk that you've got something wrong. And when you talk about, let's say, escapism and existentialism, be an escapist. Simply realize that that's part of your nature. There is existence and there is escapism. I see, don't jump too easily into the idea, escapism is bad. correct your sinful nature there. Schelling was probably saying that's part of your nature is to be escapist, to be essentialist, but keep on remembering the existence. So you have the skull on your desk, and you part of your nature is to be that escapist. You'd probably be dead if you weren't. But don't admit, people have this thing that they get a piece of what they think is wisdom, and they think they must act on it. The important point is to know, don't shoot the messenger. If there's a message which says you're doing the wrong thing, you're screwing your life up, don't be too intense about making the change, because there's a risk there. The risk is this, that there's a part of your mind that will shoot the messenger, because if your will is not to change, but the message is up on the board, change is good, and you're killing yourself trying to change, the risk is you'll shoot the messenger, you'll wipe the message away. The thing is, just contemplate the message. And if you want to be an escapist, that's fine. Just know that there's this other option without getting fanatical about it.
That's smart.
And this is the risk we see everywhere, that you must. This is what Albert Ellis was trying to warn about it.
Yes.
You must. You must. Change is good. Therefore, you must change. There's a risk in that attitude, that fanatical attitude. I mean, look at the world at the moment. Who would have known that we're going fanatical?
Yes.
50 years ago, if you told me Western civilization was going to turn fanatical, I'd go, what are you smoking, man? 1970s or 1980s, you know, watching my greatest excitements go down the, the boutique cinema and watch Fellini or something like that. And I'll go, one day the Western civilization is going to go totally Nazi.
Sure didn't seem like it.
Totally Marxist and try to kill everybody. Okay, what are you smoking, man? The 2020s are going to go like that. That's silly. And yet I'm watching it.
Yeah.
This is a warning. Our culture in existence precedes essence. Schelling was trying to say, watch out, because our ideas about existence are a construct. And they can be very useful and very right. They can also be wrong.
Right.
Before our ideas was the observation and the reality. And he was warning people to remember that. And he was saying he felt Hegel went down the wrong path with that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. A necessary corrective. I overstated my case for sure. And I appreciate the correction, because you shouldn't just have the skull on your desk. You should have a flower on your desk too. There's not just death. There's also life. There's also creativity. There's also imagination. Kenneth wrote philosophical comic books that were fantasy and science fiction. He does fantasy and science fiction art. He fully embraces the idea of the creative and the escapist and the fantastical, as well as the existentialist. They're both necessary. They both need to be explored. But it helps if you know which one you're doing. At any given moment, if you could distinguish the two from each other and say, now is the time for play and escape.
Yes, listen to the messenger, don't shoot him.
Yes.
I'm seeing a lot of shooting of messengers going on.
Yes. So I'm going to put that bullet back in the gun. But yeah, there we go. Thank you for that. Well, let's continue on. Because then he wraps up paragraph 11 with some juicy bits that are going to take some discussion. Oscar Wilde's wisdom, he says, and now he's not trusting you to keep he's not depending on you to keep a list of keywords around to know when he's making an allusion. He's telling you he's making an allusion. Oh, but what allusion is he making? Well, we'll get to that. Oscar Wilde's wisdom is lost on the many, that what is tragic is not that men die, but that something in them dies and they have to live on. Were they properly and proportionally concerned about what most deserves their concern, they would realize that already in this life, men cease to see or feel or desire or act for want of devotion to the task of self-cultivation and self-enrichment. Not death, but men's own habits and obtuseness rob them of the essence of their life while they continue to, quote, live mechanically and myopically. Not abstract death, but the all too concrete living dead should worry us the most. As our minds ossify, as our joy in life fades, and we just go through the motions, and we are not, we lack sympathecy. We are no longer responding to what's actually happening around us. We're not alive to it in the way that Nietzsche wants us to dance joyfully through life and participate in it and be alive in it. But instead, we do the zombie shuffle, and we go through the motions, and we don't notice that we're doing it. Something in us has died, and this is certainly Kierkegaard's critique in his attack on Christendom, is the difference between Jesus and the church he saw around him in his old age. Was he saw there's something alive in Jesus that's dead in the way that we're going about trying to honor him, and we should identify that and fix it in ourselves. We should resurrect that part of ourselves that's currently dead, because shuffling through life, shuffling through life is the optional death, the avoidable death. Dying at the end, okay, whatever, we're stuck with that, but that doesn't mean we have to shuffle through our life, the dead to joy, dead to hope, dead to compassion, all the things that Jesus is trying to get us turned on about. And so my question that I asked myself before today started is, what is he quoting? What is he paraphrasing here? And I know one of his favorite quotes is this one from De Profundis. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives a mimicry. Their passions a quotation. He's like, Oscar Wilde saying, scratch the surface of most people and there's nothing underneath. They're just a big mirror. They don't know who they are. They're just playing along, pretending to be the people around them. And they don't have an original thought in their heads. And that's the kind of thing Oscar Wilde would say. The man is witty, right? And a big observer of the social. But that is not actually the quote. I finally decided that was not the quote. Although I know Kenneth has that quote in mind all the time. He uses it a lot. But that's not the one he had in mind. He has, I think, this one in mind. From The Soul of Man Under Socialism, where Oscar Wilde is making arguments about what an idealized form of socialism might look like. He takes a break from talking about socialism to talk about humanity when he says, to live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. This has got to be the living death that Kenneth is alluding to here.
It's interesting when you read, I've read and I've done Oscar Wilde's Importance of Being Earnest.
Yes.
When you're doing that play, you don't think of him being a philosopher and making this kind of, writing this type of philosophical comments. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, Kenneth loves Oscar. I mean, this is what I mean, is he's not just pointing us at self-identified philosophers. He's also pointing us at literature and art and music and anything else, trying to get at oh yeah, thank you, Joe. That's nice in the text. There it is. So he's in good timing because Ari just dropped back on, so he can see this in the chat. But yeah, let's see, that someone's goal might be entertainment, but the way that they find it fulfilling to entertain people is through humor, like Oscar Wilde, that is laced with searing social commentary. And so if you're looking for insight into the way people live their lives, it might come out of a comedian like Oscar Wilde, or it might come out of Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, writing his social critiques of life in Russia and human nature. He's going to spill some juicy bits about human nature. I think it's hilarious that one of Kenneth's very favorite quotes comes from William Blake writing a cranky letter at somebody who's refusing to pay him for a piece of art. And essentially, the whole letter is, oh, come on, man. I painted the painting. Now give me my money. And yet buried in this complaint, and this is like that early piece of cuneiform from Babylon, where the guy's complaining about the poor quality copper that he bought. This is William Blake saying, I made you a perfectly good painting. Now pay me. But along the way, when he's trying to explain how could we possibly be misunderstanding each other all that well, that's when he says, as a man is, so he sees. He drops that nugget of brilliance about, I guess the problem, Mr. Banker, is that you look at the world and all you can see is money. And the tree is just a big green thing that stands in your way. Whereas I see God's creation on earth, and all the wonder and magic of the divine. That's why we're having this problem, is that's a Rorschach test, and you don't see what I see because you're a different person than I am. It's a crank letter, but it's got wisdom hiding in it. Kenneth is a equal opportunity scavenger of wisdom. He'll take it wherever he can find it. And I've noticed more than once, he'll take a quote out of context and use it sometimes for the opposite of the purpose the author had in mind. The author might have been making one point that Kenneth absolutely doesn't agree with. But if you take that quote on its own in isolation, it says something that Kenneth really does agree with. And he's shameless about doing that. Because what he's looking for is those Thales style, Heraclitean style, Nietzschean style, dense choice nuggets of philosophical meaning. And, if that happens to crop up coming out of the mouth of a character in A Midsummer Night's, if it's Lord, what fools these mortals be, supposedly a throwaway line from Shakespeare, but Kenneth will say, "Oh no, that's right there. That's how the Greeks felt about what it is to be human. We are inherently fools, and that all the gods, even a little god, like the character who's speaking in A Midsummer Night's Dream, would all agree this is the foolish species." So he takes it and he runs with it. It's the thing to know when you're reading Kenneth's writing, as he is trying to use every tool at his disposal to get the point across. Phineas, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I really like that comment from Oscar Wilde about there's something that was living up in us, and that's the thing that passes away, and people keep living, but they just go. That's all. I'm going to try to hold on to that. I'm sure I will. But I looked up Oscar Wilde from that, and I think you'll like this quote. Because it really relates to what you grapple with a lot with the oak tree compared to a human, and the oak tree has such clear direction, but the human doesn't, and we've got to figure out what to become. And then so this quote kind of this is his take on that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what's interesting and useful about the way that Kenneth goes about utilizing these. Oh God, I said utilize. Goes about using these quotes is that when he has a difficult insight that he's trying to get across to us, he'll come at it from many different angles. And so you start to notice, just like you did, you start to notice as you're reading, hey, this guy's almost like saying the same thing in a completely different way. And Kenneth's like, yeah. And wait till you see the other 16 I have lined up for you. They're all going to say it in a different way. But it's because, all people in all times, in all places are nevertheless living the same human life. And we're what we carry with us in common is the stuff that's essential to our character as a species. And so, yeah, it could be, it could be a Chinese sage in a cave, or it could be an Australian Aborigine, writing her biography, or it could be, any number of possible contexts. Somebody could say the thing that is essential about human nature because they share it. And each of these worldviews and perspectives, because it's looking at reality from a different angle, it can notice things that other people didn't notice, but it's about the same thing that we're all trying to understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I'm not sure if you noticed, but I posted the quote, and the condensed version. I was just gonna let you read it, but the condensed version is if you want to be a grocer, you'll become that, but that'll be a punishment. If you never know what you want to do, you'll live a dynamic life, the artistic life. Unsure of each day, you'll be unsure of who you are and what you know, and you will never become anything, and that is your reward.
Yes. Yes, yes. There's the quote. Thank you. Thank you for that. Ah, yes. So, of course, our general context here is this question of, you know, the context for these Oscar Wilde quotes is Kenneth reminding us that when people hear immortality, what they hear is a possibility of an escape from their fear of death. And he's saying that Jesus implies that that is not the scariest thing that can happen to a person, that they die, that there are far scarier things. Can you be alive to your fellow human beings and to yourself? Can you be alive in the world? Um, and care and act again, despite the fact that the society around you is giving you 1,000 reasons to start to just slump into the zombie shuffle. Can you resist those pressures and insist on being alive? And it's interesting that Kenneth is making this argument about Jesus, because this is one of the places where he's doing a Nietzschean thing. Kenneth says Nietzsche is a vitalist. Of all of the ethics that he's concerned with, the thing he's most concerned with is, are we actually living a life, or are we the shuffling living dead? Are we letting ourselves die inside? And he hasn't quoted Nietzsche, but the whole concern is Nietzschean, right? This is one of Nietzsche's core topics. In the same way, if somebody's talking about a river flowing, you shouldn't need anyone to tell you that Heraclitus, the ghost of Heraclitus, is spooking his way over the conversation. It's the same thing. If you're seeing a discussion in Kenneth or anywhere, philosophical, that's about this question of, are we really alive, or are we settling into a half death? The spirit of Nietzsche is floating over the conversation, because that was his preeminent concern. Everything he writes is about that. And he's writing that because, a lifetime of trying to figure out the difference between authentic Greek manuscripts and those that have been tampered with depends that he understand the Greek spirit well enough to tell when the tampering violates that spirit. And he says one of the things that he concludes is the Greeks really cared about health and vitality, sophrosune. They cared about it a lot. And one of the ways that you can tell when somebody has lied and inserted something into the text that doesn't belong there is that it deviates from that. It turns away in a way that the Greeks wouldn't have done. Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Somewhat ambivalent about immortality. I think Prometheus and Sisyphus were immortal. Be careful what you wish for. The Chinese were correct on this one.
And Kenneth's favorite extra riff on "Be careful what you wish for," when he's talking about Heraclitus's "it would not be better for men if they got what they wanted," he says, and Heraclitus is implying something that almost all of us miss, that's even deeper than maybe the thing you get isn't what you really needed. He says, Heraclitus is also saying, it's not only is it maybe not healthy to get what you wanted, it's not even healthy to want it. The wanting itself makes you sick. To want irreal, inhuman things, it wrecks your life. It makes you obsessed about and focused about things that twist you in the desiring. And there's any number of stories from Dickens or the Greeks or anywhere else that talk about people being twisted by desire. But he says all of this is implicit in the Heraclitus quote.
I think there's a lot in the Greeks about how if you were immortal, it perverts morality. It's may not be something, like you said, healthy to even wish for. Because if nothing I mean, if you've if there's no risk in the consequences of your actions to you, what is morality? So I'm not arguing if that's the Christian position, but I think it's something we should think about here or keep in mind.
And as we talk about this, of course, we're not talking about what's actually so. I said it at the beginning, but I'm going to remind again on these issues of immortality, we're not talking about what's actually so. We don't know what's actually so. We're trying to talk about how did the ancients see it and how did the medievals see it. We're trying to compare and contrast the differences between them. And so it's interesting because, I mean, part of what he set up in these paragraphs is that there is not only is there a conflict between how Jesus saw things and how the ancients saw things, despite the amount of overlap there is, which he also points out, but there's also an enormous amount of contrast between how Jesus saw things and how the medieval church saw things. And that tension, that creative tension is one of the things that causes all the spin-off monastic movements and, mad men of the desert and desert mothers and fathers, where they're getting a lot of their spiritualities from the creative tension between, okay, this is what the church is telling me, but I was reading Jesus the other day and he sure seemed to say the opposite on some of these issues. And so there is this creative ferment that's being generated by that tension. And the tension is where he started us today in the discussion. Phineas, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, on the it's not even worth the desiring for, like the twist, it can twist things a bit. I have a direct experience with that from like literally last night. So basically I played as a kid when I was like 10 or something. I played RuneScape, which is this video game. And so that was fun and all that, and then didn't play it for a long time. But I've been trying to figure out a way to like combine educational stuff with video games, because it'd be cool if you could get learning integrated with a game. And then I was like, oh, actually, RuneScape has lots of layers. There's money. There's like all these items. So maybe you could pair in questions with getting items or XP, whatever. So then, and it's also kind of fun because I'm tinkering with like trying to program with it or whatever. And so I'm doing that. And so, anyways, that sort of reawakened some neurons in my brain. And so last night I was dreaming about RuneScape. And so now my mind has now been like put onto this sort of totally irrelevant thing that technically I could be dreaming about a connection with God or like my relationship with other people, but I was like dreaming about RuneScape. So it actually totally a very for sure not real thing has like subverted my consciousness on some level.
Yes. The example that I'm excited about on this subject is the company that's busy bringing back dire wolves and mammoths using genetic analysis, and they're gonna bring these species back from extinction. And of course, one of the questions that pops to mind is, well, where are they going to live? All the animals we already have are going extinct because we keep spreading and taking more and more land. They need land, and if there's not enough for the elephants we have, what are we going to do with the new mammoths? Where are they going to live? But there's a more compelling problem, and the compelling problem is that they're spending untold millions of dollars to bring back the mammoth, whereas up on Vancouver Island, sorry, not Vancouver Island, but Vancouver, BC, just a few hours north of me, there's a butterfly that's almost extinct. Almost some of the last ones in the world are living in this one little park that they designated that's got an old marsh in it. And someone who identified that put together a proposal that said for $1,200, we could double the amount of land for that butterfly. And we could double its population and thus cut in half the odds that it's going to go extinct. But it would cost $1,200. But literally nobody's spending $1,200 to keep this butterfly from going extinct. They're spending millions on bringing back something that doesn't have anywhere to live. And they're not spending just pennies on the dollar to actually save the ones we've got. And this is the problem we have all over the world. We don't actually know where the priorities should be. It's hard for us to focus and to think about what's the right thing to want. A lot of the butterflies that are going extinct in the Pacific Northwest you think of the Pacific Northwest as forests, right? And so you think, well, it must be because all the forests are being chopped down. It's like, no, those ones are fine. There's actually a lot of forests in the Pacific Northwest. Not as much as there should be, but there's still a lot. What's really missing in the Northwest is the prairies, because the prairies were handy places to put a farm or a shopping mall or a city. And so 99% of the original Pacific Northwest prairie is gone. It's almost an extinct ecosystem. And it would be so easy to bring back. We still have the plants. None of them have quite gone extinct yet. We still have the butterflies and the bees. We would just have to set aside some space for them. And it wouldn't cost much, but it wouldn't be a big, exciting thing like making a giant gun or bringing a species back from extinction. So we don't want that. We want to look like a hero. We don't want to say, well, I bought a bunch of land and I planted some flowers. It's like, how do I get to be a hero that way? And it's like, well, I don't know about getting to be perceived as a hero, but saving a bunch of things from extinction is pretty fucking important. But we don't know.
There's a similar thing in Southern Ontario. So like basically there's really nice farmland just right at the bottom of Southern Ontario because that's where the glaciers kind of ended.
Yeah.
And I was looking like where are the native plants and all that, and then there's this one native prairie reserve, but it's like 10 acres or two. I think it's like 2 acres actually, and it's like 2 acres out of I don't know 200,000 acres. I'm not sure the full scale, and it's like we really don't. We could do a little bit better setting space aside. And then yeah, it's to your point. It's like okay, tigers will never go extinct, elephants will never go extinct, and orcas will never go. It's like, but like everything else doesn't matter. We don't really know what those are. So if they get squashed, it's all good.
Yeah. In ecological circles, they talk about the difference between charismatic organisms and non-charismatic organisms. So everybody wants to save the panda bear, but most people have never even heard of the sloth bear. So there's great efforts to save the panda bear, and meanwhile the sloth bear's in trouble. It's like, what? Sloth bear? What's that?
How do you spell that? Flunk bear?
Sloth, like like the animal, a sloth. There's a kind of bear called a
SLOT?
sloth bear. And it has the name because it's so shaggy, kind of looks like a sloth. But or South America's spectacled bear. Most people don't even know it exists. It could be in a world of trouble and nobody would know. We just don't actually know what's around or what's in trouble. In Oregon, a rare subspecies of butterfly went extinct, and it took Oregon 30 years to notice. It had gone extinct 30 years ago. They couldn't even invoke the Endangered Species Act because no one noticed when it died. And what it reminds me of is there is a fish, the sunfish, that is reputed to have such a low level of innervation that other fish can be eating it and it doesn't notice. It's like, parts of it are being chewed off and it can't feel it. It doesn't know that it's in trouble. Its connection to reality is so weak. It's like the living dead. It's like it's half dead. It can't. And this might be an exaggeration, but at least it's a metaphor. It's like Nietzsche says you want to be alive. You want to feel the things that matter. If they're going well, you want to feel that. You want to feel gratitude and joy. And if they're going poorly, you want to feel the pain of it so that you know to turn and get the thing to stop eating your leg. If you can't even tell your leg's being eaten, you're in some serious trouble. Right? I mean, that is to be a pain-free existence would be a curse. It means you can't protect yourself. You can't do the right thing.
And yet your favorite one-cell organisms, those sponge, what do you call the sponge?
Oh, the slime molds.
Slime molds would know, what's going on,
No
in
nerves at all.
Yeah.
They still pay better attention than some people. Yes. Yes. Anyway, thank you, Phineas.
I thought of one more thing to visualize based on what you're saying of like,
Go ahead.
it's like if we look at what we've let an ecosystem slide to before we feel like it's worth stepping in, that would be like waiting until there were 100 humans left and being like, good job, we saved them. It's like still got 100, it's all good. It's like that's a pretty big slope from where we were.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I'm doing work on prairie reconstruction in the Pacific Northwest, trying to figure out what we should be planting, and I use a lot of the leading services that are out there for identifying what's in trouble and what's not. And one of the funniest things to me, from a philosophical perspective, is that they will give these things a global rating, like saying it is absolutely not in trouble. I mean, globally, there's plenty of them. And then in the small text, this is like the part on the medicine bottle where it says, okay, this might solve your social anxiety, but it, might also cause explosive diarrhea at random points throughout the day and, give you migraines and you might not be able to walk, you might die 10 years early. But other than that, you'll be fine. And so the small text on these things say, globally, this butterfly is fine. Of course, it might be completely extirpated from parts of its range. It might have died out in Seattle. It might have died out in Portland. It might not be in New York anymore, but it's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. And you can tell that, the argument is right up until the very last field is under pressure. They'll keep saying it's fine. Yeah, 99% of them are gone, but look, we've still got 100, like Phineas was saying. How many fucking butterflies do you want? I mean, what? You got 100, shut up. And the question of not do I like how many there are or not like how many there are, but how many did there used to be before we started messing with things? And how does that compare to how many there are now? And is that an arrow that goes up because we've made things so much healthier that there's more butterflies? Or is it even because we've had no real effect at all? Or is it so far down that 90% of them are gone and we're still saying, this is fine. My house is burned 90% of the way to the ground, but look, I've still got some walls. And look, that TV set's not on fire yet. Everything's fine. It's there's nothing to see here. That's the state of the art in conservation today, in case anyone's confused, right? I spent the last year doing deep dives on this stuff. And man, people who don't want an animal to go extinct in a specific region have their work cut out for them because everyone keeps saying, what? There's still plenty of them. I mean, yeah, not in your region, but elsewhere. Why should you care? Why should it matter to you if your ecosystem's dying? There's some other ecosystems alive somewhere else. That should make you happy. That's where we are. That's our level of understanding.
And on the immortality topic, you need a lot of them to be immortal. Like you can't,
Yes.
100 isn't an immortal population.
100 doesn't cut it. Yes. When you're down to 100, you're at the problem where you're assuming that there will never be any crises. No meteor is going to hit. No volcano is going to go off. There won't be an earthquake. There won't be a tsunami. No crisis can arise because, after all, that would if you've got 100 butterflies in one place, that's awfully vulnerable, right? That's just fragile as hell as an ecosystem. Well, I'm going to wrap us up with the first sentence of chapter 12, just to stick my toes in the water. Because in a way, even though it's the opening of the next paragraph, it's also a summary of what we said before, which is what Jesus taught was heartening wisdom about the fount of spirit, the gift of seeing what continues to give itself, whether men close their eyes and hearts to it or open them. And part of what he's talking about here, he mentioned, I can't even remember if it was earlier in this chapter or if it was a previous chapter, when he said that what Christianity is trying to teach in opposition to the ancient worldview is the concept that instead of valuing zero-sum goods, either you get the pie or I get the pie, but we can't both have the pie. Those are zero-sum goods. And it's a zero-sum interpretation of the world. The Christianity is saying that may be true of gifts of nature or of the flesh, but it's not true of gifts of the spirit. Because if I love you, it doesn't mean I can't also love him, right? I'm not using up the love. If all of us behave in a loving fashion towards one another, our love is not exhausted and now we can't love anybody. But instead, we all feel better that somebody cares about us and we're able to be more loving towards other people. He says there is this way in which, says Mark, I think it was Mark, the gifts of the Spirit are a paradox and a confusion to people who are used to counting their pennies, because the gifts of the Spirit grow when they're shared instead of shrinking when they're shared. And so this is that concept that the brotherhood of man has the potential to increase the wealth for everybody instead of using it up by splitting it among too many people.
But he had a Judas.
Yeah, but did he want the Judas? Was Judas necessary for him to fulfill his mission? There were some fierce arguments fought in the medieval period over this question. Is Judas a saint or a sinner? Is he necessary to the plan, or is he a betrayer of the plan? Yeah. And of course, the whole point of the Judas story, right, is they thought they got rid of Jesus by killing him, and instead, he lives forever and rises from the grave and gives everlasting life. So again, it's sabotaging the notion of zero-sum values that get used up if you share them. And it emphasizes the concept of infinitizing. And this is why I wanted to end with this sentence, because he talked about immortality. So the gifts of the Spirit are infinitizing. They grow like acorns can turn into trees instead of shrinking. If you eat the acorn, you don't have any acorns left. But if you plant the acorn, you'll have acorns for the rest of your life and your kids' lives and your grandkids' lives and on and on. And this is the distinction that Christianity is trying to make.
You can never eat enough acorns to make the trees go extinct, believe me.
It's a lot
It's
of
amazing
acorns.
how, here in America, nobody eats acorns. In
Right.
Korea, people ate acorns. And I
Yes.
see all these acorns going to waste, and it's sad.
Yes.
And you can make some really delicious, I mean, it's very labor intensive to get the acorn to the Koreans eat it kind of like a jello kind of a form. And it's very good, but
You'd have to process it some way, because pure acorn wouldn't be that good for you, would it?
Yeah, they clearly process it.
they leach all the acid out in
Yeah.
soaking in water and everything. Yeah, it's very labor intensive, but end product is pretty delicious.
Do we just have a squirrel shortage, Jenny?
That must be the
That's it.
problem. Anyway, I hope y'all had a good time. I had a good time.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank
Good
you
night.
Yeah,
all.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And we'll see you all next week.